Their Double Blessing by Anna L. Jones. A Romancely.com billionaire romance story.
Chapter 1. Patricia Williams buttoned up her uniform, smiling proudly in front of the mirror, showing off her dark chocolate skin, fit figure, and black braids. She'd never understood what people had against working in malls. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but that was true for many jobs. Besides, these were the occupations that people often worked to achieve instead of getting through connections. Earning your place was a source of pride few things could compare to. A lesson she wished Mary would learn, instead of trying to play matchmaker with every man in sight. You'd think a woman conned out of everything by an ex would turn their back on romance. Not her grown little sister. Working in security was a respectable job that required dedication and perseverance. After 2 failed marriages and 5 miscarriages, romance was an afterthought for Patricia. Men were mostly selfish creatures who wanted arm candy over an equal companion. She'd had enough of them trying to conquer or demean her. Life was better off with trusted friends and a long journey without obstacles. Vacations without a boyfriend, and maybe with a friend or two, were often great. In the end, love from those closest to her seemed a safer bet than with a random stranger only wanting a fling or worse. Mary disagreed, always the romantic. Matching hazel eyes and sisterhood was all they had in common. Dyeing her hair chestnut brown, using creams to lighten her skin, and needing male company, they were polar opposites, made by the point that Patricia had thrown away love because of heartbreak and laziness, the latter being the most offensive to a professional workaholic. Relationships needed work, but throwing away everything for a man was foolhardy. 2 failed marriages almost broke her will, not to mention the miscarriages in an attempt to appease men who would leave her in the end. The first 2 were genuine attempts, but after that, it was all pressure from men who refused to accept being with a woman who couldn't be a mother to their children. Her second husband had laughed in her face when she'd insisted on adoption. After that divorce and a few dates over the years, Patricia swore off romance. "I can't believe you enjoy working the night shift. That has to be when the worst comes out." Mary walked in, eating cookie dough out of the container and dressed in silk pajamas with light makeup, never one to take off the war paint of love before the head hit the pillow at midnight. "I'm still trying to adjust to the shift changes at this new job." Patricia's head whipped around. Those words always came before a new firing. "Don't you dare lose this one, Mary. I vouched for you, and being a part-time telemarketer isn't that hard. Word is you keep slipping out for smokes or coming in late. Living here is temporary. No one gets back on their feet without working for that goal." Mary mumbled underneath her breath before storming into the bedroom. "What you need is a man to help you unwind. I know my dalliance went south, but that's no excuse to keep being such a sour puss. Those exes have nothing to do with your future. You're 35, time isn't going to be kinder to you. Get a ring on your finger before no one is available." Patricia rounded on her sister. It was bad enough having to share a tiny apartment with someone who did none of the chores and barely helped with payments, but she had to deal with backseat commentary on her personal life, too. "I don't want another man trying to control me. Focus on getting your situation in order before judging me. Men put you in this situation. At least I can take care of myself. Now put that dough back and share out some next time instead of eating it out like you live here alone." Mary's eyes filled with tears. The waterworks always came when criticized, a move that had worked on their parents. "All I want is for my big sister to be happy. If that's a crime, then I'll gladly pay the price. Just because we both had terrible romances in the past doesn't mean we should give up. I know you still want a baby. 3 applications to adoption agencies don't lie. What did I tell you about looking through my things?" Patricia felt the heat rise in her face. "I can't believe that you're still acting like a child at the age of 30. This is my apartment, and my papers are private. What I want is a beautiful life without people telling me what to do, as if my word doesn't matter." Mary sat at the edge of the bed with her head down. "Is that what you think? That I'm like this because I don't care? I want you to have a companion to share a life together and be happy. If I thought you truly wanted to be single, then I would stop. But you want to be with someone who loves and respects who you are. That is not out of reach. Please don't give up on your soulmate because of a few mistakes." "Mistakes?" Patricia screeched. "I've done everything right and my life was torn apart. My husband's wanted a dutiful wife, not an equal. I was pushed into carrying 5 failed pregnancies and laughed out of adoption. Those agencies wouldn't even accept me as a single mother. claiming my job was either too dangerous or unpredictable. What a joke. I know cop couples with multiple adopted babies. Why? Because if you have a man, then they think you're good enough to raise a child. Sorry if that was one of my mistakes, Mary. I'll try to do better just for my little sis. Mary opened her mouth, then closed it. After a long silence, she muttered a quick, "Sorry," and fled. The slam of the bathroom door probably equaling another bath that would use up the hot water. But right now the silence was worth bathing without that luxury later, especially since their conversation was 2 seconds away from a nasty confrontation. Patricia finished getting ready, then left after turning off the television and putting away the cookie dough Mary had abandoned on her bed, and ignoring the sofa bed overflowing with garbage as she exited the apartment for work. Patricia wasn't always a skeptic. Once she was young and in love, like many females. But as time passed and men showed their true colors, things changed. A woman could only accept heartbreak and betrayal so many times. Being made a fool of for the sake of a society that believed women needed a partner to be whole or worthy wasn't worth it. Her husbands had started off as great men. They had upstanding jobs, supposedly respected both genders, and loved her completely, until they realized she wouldn't submit. And worse, couldn't have children. The first left her, and it was agonizing. Her second husband was carefully selected, yet he wasn't a winner in the end, being against the idea of adoption and even suggesting that she'd miscarried on purpose. That one ended badly, and she swore off marriage after that, which caused an end to some of the relationships that followed. Men refusing to accept she wasn't going to be their next wedding conquest. The rest ended for the usual reasons. Her job, refusal to be lesser, and a host of other excuses males hated females about. The culture of romance was a terrible notion used to yoke women into unwanted relationships. Sure, some succeeded with lovely couples and families, but what about those that imploded? All the lives ruined in a bid to make the unfixable work. The thought that not having someone by your side was a failure of epic proportions? There was a reason over 50% of marriages ended in divorce. Not everyone was meant to have a soulmate. The miscarriages were awful. Each loss felt like a scarlet letter marking Patricia as an evil person undeserving of motherhood. The truth was, her body wasn't made for having babies. She wasn't the first woman afflicted by this and wouldn't be the last. Yet people acted as if it were her fault and that she had to do something to undo it, which was far from what science taught, but society always wanted someone to blame. She was done falling into that trap, and despite still wanting a child, she gave that dream up to maintain her sanity. The world still fought against the notion of an independent woman. Sure, there were more rights than before, and men couldn't harm them without consequences. But there was no doubt that this was still a man's world, one where women would always have to fight harder to get half of what their opposite counterparts got. Society felt that children needed men in their lives at all times, even though women had to birth these babies into existence. The logic was flawed, but males enjoyed the advantages too much to share their spoils with who they considered the weaker sex. She was determined to find an alternate outlet. Love could be found somewhere other than with a partner or husband. Friends, family, and community also mattered. Being there for those you cared about was just as crucial as a genuine romantic relationship, if not even more. She'd been there for many who needed help, some betrayed by the very person who'd put a ring on their finger and declared everlasting love. A pain she knew all too well. Moving forward meant leaving that Valentine's Day mentality behind and living in the real world. As hard as that was, it was easier than chasing a fantasy. Her community had so much to give. Dedicating time to that instead of toxic partners had enriched her life. The middle-income earners where she lived had to work harder every year. Mortgages and rent were on the rise as more outsiders with deeper pockets drove them out. She had to deal with several increases in rent. Worse, the extra expense of allowing her sister to stay since it was supposed to be single occupancy. Tonight security had to be extra tight. There was to be a visit from a rich white guy hoping to gain publicity through charity. She'd seen it before. Someone with the big bucks swooped in and helped fix up the neighborhood a bit. They got an ego boost via news and accolades, then disappeared. Their only goal being a notch on their belt to feel better about being part of the 1%. If these braggarts truly helped the world, then things would be a whole lot better. But the more money people had, the greedier they became. She signed when noticing employees had dressed up more than usual. With a sigh, she stayed silent. Many thought Patricia was a spoilsport, bringing up negativity instead of just having fun. Reminding them that men like Mr. Big Bucks wouldn't give them the time of day would just anger them. She especially pitied the women who had on stylish makeup and clothes hoping to reel him in. Men like that only married women of their station or poorer hotties they could control. People at regular malls like this didn't have a chance. Most still had too much self-respect. "Patricia, we need you watching the entrance," her supervisor called. "There was a last-minute shake-up, and we're short 2 guards. Backup security can fill in your usual spot. Mr. Kent will be arriving soon." "No problem." Patricia went to her new station. Ensuring no one did anything illegal or immoral on mall property was her only job. It didn't matter where she had to patrol. Just then, a dark limo came up with a line of SUVs. There was also press and a lot of fanfare. "So it begins," she sighed. George Kent emerged from the limo along with his personal bodyguards. Blonde, blue-eyed, and fit, he was a media magnate. The fanfare and pomp waiting for him were expected. Many thought being a wealthy billionaire was easy, but making money was work no matter how much you had, though wealth added advantages he couldn't ignore. Descended from a long line of businessmen and women, his family was in various industries including fashion and technology. He mainly invested in promising new ventures, helping others achieve their best potential in a world often too self-absorbed to assist their fellow man. When he decided to do a countrywide, state-by-state charity run, most of his family thought it was ridiculous. What was the point of donating so much to people who weren't connected? Their lives were often filled with people who were of use to them, whether in business or otherwise. Personal relationships were few and far between. Even some relatives were only business companions at best. A massive chunk of his life was invested in the dollars and cents earned. Not the kind of life that afforded you to trust many people once the chips were down. Then again, as a billionaire, that low point was hard to find outside of matters of the heart. His publicist Cynthia Barnes loved the idea, felt that it would give him a fresh face among those under 40, or better yet, 25. According to her, most people that age either didn't know about him or assumed he was privileged white man and nothing more. Unlike most rich Caucasians, he wasn't one to deny the advantages that money and the color of his skin gave him, one that gave him many luxuries except the one he longed for most. A soulmate that he could have a romantic life with. He was now considering an arranged marriage with the daughter of an older businessman who was a family friend. After losing his fiancée in his early 20s, he was unable to find love again. She was his soulmate from prep school, and losing her shattered him. He tried all sorts of relationships, but nothing worked. In the end, he still wanted to have kids and have them raised in a loving, stable home. Not one filled with nannies like he had to endure, and being a single father would make that impossible to avoid. "Are you ready to go inside, sir?" one of the bodyguards said. "Of course." George moved forward, noticing a security guard frowning at him. It was nothing new, people judging him for being wealthy. But something about her captivated him. She was a security guard, but looked like a model from a shampoo commercial or primetime television actress. How could someone so stunning be stuck watching over a mall? Plus, there was something in her eyes that just grasped his very soul. Whoever she was, there was more to her than just her job keeping this area secure. Inside the mall, he was greeted by selected members of staff and even a few politicians, each there to soak up the attention from his charity drive. He was used to people whose only goal was to make things better for themselves and to be part of the spotlight. There was a time when he was just like them. Now he had to tolerate them while watching the ordinary folk go about their lives, without the burden wealth gave when it came to finding real friends and avoiding the press. He envied those who maintained wealth and anonymity, a lucky lot. "Mr. Kent, how do you feel donating time and money to this poor community?" a reporter with a dazzling smile asked. "I wouldn't call a community that's down on its luck poor," George started. "Yes, there are needs, including fixing up this mall, but we should respect all that's been achieved by the locals and their representatives. I'm but a wealthy man hoping to help spread some money around. Sure, I'm running a charity drive and want to make a difference, but there are many needs that not even my money can provide. Hopefully, with the help of better finances, the people of this wonderful community can continue to help themselves and be the proud citizens I know them to be." There was a round of applause from shoppers gathered to watch him touring the mall. Seeing their proud faces made his heart soar. These were the people he wanted to help, the ones who needed and wanted to better their community. When a little girl asked his bodyguard if he would accept her card, it was almost too much. The homemade card just said, "Thank you, George Kent." Aside from seeing the mystery woman, this was the best part of the night. As time went on, he decided to try and figure out who that guard was. No matter his best efforts, she overwhelmed his thoughts. There had to be a reason this woman was on his mind. Even his chest tightened, which made him feel flushed at an age no one wanted to blush in public. There was no way he'd developed a crush on a stranger at first sight. That kind of silliness was reserved for young people in movies. He was a professional businessman who knew better. There had to be a better explanation. He took a break from talking to walk around the mall, instructing his bodyguards to not allow anyone to speak to him without permission. Just as he was about to give up the search, a pair of security guards chatting with a young lady at a kiosk caught his eye. Trying to pry the woman's identity from her colleagues was a huge no-no. But perhaps an employee at the mall wouldn't question his motives too closely. "Good night. I was wondering if I could ask you a quick question?" George walked up after the guards left.
"Oh, hi, Mr. Kent." The young lady looked up from her cell phone. "I'm not ignoring my work. The phone gives me special updates."
"Of course. Do you know the female security who patrols out front?" "Well, this is a mall, and the guards work on rotation, so it's a little hard with that description." The female chuckled. George could feel his neck getting warm. "I meant to thank her. I was out front and things got a bit hectic. She's black with long braids, and I'm not sure if she was that happy to see me or be outside for that matter. Narrows things down a bit." The female flipped through her phone. "Is this her? Patricia usually patrols inside, but she's the only one I can think of who would frown at a rich guy because she doesn't care about that." "Yes, that's her." George recognized the woman smiling with a group of guards by a taco stand. "Thank you." He pulled out his wallet but noticed he only had hundreds. "Just give her the 100, one of his bodyguards whispered. The young lady squealed as she took the crisp note. "I never thought me knowing Patricia Williams would make me so lucky. Thanks, sir." George walked away, glad to have a name. Better yet, with how grateful that young lady was for receiving a tip. He had an idea on how to see Patricia again. "Thank you all for guarding this mall and myself tonight," he said to all the security gathered. After the mall closed, he'd requested to meet and thank all the security, personally shaking hands with all of them, including Patricia Williams, who still seemed to have a permanent frown when he popped up. At least he got to see her relaxed from a distance. "I think a great way of showing my appreciation is to invite you all to a special luncheon," George went on. "I know as the rich white guy passing through, I'm not a member of your community, but I want to speak with more of you on a personal level. Besides, why not get a great evening out on me? After all, I can afford it," he said, and most laughed with him. "What about other members of staff?" a voice asked. George barely kept a straight face, realizing it was Patricia speaking. "Yes? You can afford to feed us all, so why not treat all the staff at the mall? What makes the security guard so special? Yes, we watched over you, but so did every employee who didn't want to work at the store where a white guy gets jumped in front of cameras," Patricia countered. There were mumbles of dissent. A few unkind words were thrown. "Hey, there's no need to argue. It's true. I can afford to have an event for everyone," George said. "In fact, I'll host several luncheons over the next couple of days. My assistants will help collect schedules and dates that will best accommodate everyone. So let's give Miss Williams a round of applause for speaking up." The claps were few, but he could see that by her smirk, Patricia didn't care. At first, he just wanted to meet her. Now he admired her spunk as well.
Chapter 2. Patricia felt strange after meeting George. There was no question he was just like any other billionaire, throwing around his money to get attention and holding grand press conferences, basking in the glow of the role of white savior to a community he knew nothing about. She was glad this time to be placed outside, which allowed her to miss most of the vomit-inducing bending over backwards people would have gone to make him happy. Patrolling out front might have had the least drama and opportunities to check in with the young people. Her job was security, not celebrity watching. At the end of the day, everything worked out for the best. Then again, he also seemed genuinely interested in making people happy. In news clips, it was touching how kind he was to that young girl giving him a card. Most would have had someone else take it to give to George later, but he personally accepted the gift. There was also the defense of their community, talking about them not being poor and deserving of respect. While she agreed with him poverty wasn't a bad word, the way that reporter said it was out of line. Some felt that if you needed any kind of charity, then you were less than. It was good to see a person of means making it clear that was wrong. She could respect him for that move. When she confronted him about the limited luncheon, the words just came flowing from her mouth. She'd always been someone who spoke her mind, not caring about the consequences in the immediate moment. Everyone at the mall deserved to get pampered. It was nice he was willing to do it at all, but she could never feel right enjoying herself and leaving other employees in the dust. Clearly others didn't agree, but human nature was often selfish. But now she was worried. Several fellow guards had called her later upset about the move, concerned that George might cancel. If that happened, then her job would be in jeopardy. The higher-ups would be furious she upset such a major person in public. Sure, the firing couldn't be done outright, but she'd seen firsthand how those who crossed the wrong people got pushed out. Their lives made so difficult that they end up quitting themselves. By then word got out they were difficult, making it hard for them find new jobs. She had no interest in joining that lot anytime soon. Her life was complicated enough. The best bet was to lay low and stay out of the way. Just work and home for a bit. Let things die down. Hopefully, without her presence at the luncheon, Mr. Moneybags might calm down. If not, then she could kiss all the peace in her life goodbye. She wasn't sorry for speaking the truth, but she was also no martyr. Anyone who wanted to throw themselves on a social landmine was free to do so. She preferred to help and still remain in one piece. So, when are you going to attend that fancy event? Mary walked in with multiple shopping bags. The woman always found a way to get new things. There was limited space, and she was sick of her sister throwing clothes out of the closet to hang up new stuff. Who needed a new outfit every day? Not normal people. That was without question. I'm not going. There are more than enough people rushing over to make both the mall and that rich guy look good. They don't need me, I promise. Mary dropped the bags and groaned. This was why she didn't want her sister finding out. But this girl had her hand on the pulse for anything exciting. Since their community wasn't the hip spot like the places Mary usually hung out, George's luncheon was like a red carpet event, which made not going even more difficult with a sister like this one. I can only go if someone's my +1. Why can't it be you? I don't want to beg strangers. Please, Patricia, I swear to not be too dramatic. We eat, watch the time fly by, then go home. No, if we go, you're going to talk to everyone in sight. Then your matchmaking urges are going to go into overdrive. I don't want fellow employees to see me yelling at my own blood to leave me alone. Patricia had no doubt that Mary would make a spectacle. Her little sister couldn't help it. If they weren't related, she would never be around someone like this for even 5 seconds. It was agonizing enough dealing with Mary when things were normal. During a fancy luncheon would be a nightmare. Her sister would hunt down every eligible bachelor and divorcee to introduce Patricia to. Patricia couldn't imagine anything worse outside of being hit by a car during rush-hour traffic. No, she would consider a terrible death over that nightmare. Mary pouted and went off to watch television. Patricia knew this wasn't over. The idea of finding romance now was ridiculous. Yes, she was under 40 and still in what society considered her prime. But she was exhausted by all the negativity that came with past relationships. Not all of them were monsters, but they ended for a reason. She was better off living the single life and enjoying time with friends and family. Taking a nap, she was unprepared when a pair of hands shook her awake. In fighting mode, she flipped the person over. Only after hearing a series of screams did she realize it was Mary. Mary, what do you think you're doing? I thought someone was trying to attack me. Only this drama queen would shake someone awake as if it was a real emergency. Kill the messenger, why don't you? Mary squeaked. She looked pale and rubbed the arm Patricia had used to flip her over. I come bearing gifts, and you try to kill me. Typical. I have a good mind not to give you my perfect proposal. Patricia had to beg the Lord to keep her from kicking Mary off the bed. Whatever this offer was, it would be nothing good. Why couldn't she have a twin? Someone more like her to have real conversations with? Mary wasn't the worst sister in the world, but sometimes she wondered what it would be like to have a sibling who respected her choices and wasn't so self-absorbed. What could possibly be worth scaring the life out of me? You're the one in attack mode and complaining about being scared? Typical. I think you might change your mind after seeing this. Mary held up an envelope bursting with money. The last time Patricia had seen her sister with that much cash was... never. Then again, having a sister who only thought of herself made it hard to pay all the bills piling up. Patricia tried to grab it, but Mary danced out of her reach. She could wrestle Mary for it, but that would be stooping to a level her sister would never let her live down. Beating up blood for money. Then again, with the bills that cash could pay, perhaps the shame would be worth it. You better give me a good reason not to kick you out for hoarding all that cash. Mary rolled her eyes. Of course you're mad instead of grateful. Listen, if you take me to the luncheon, the money is yours. I was saving it for something special, but an event like this only comes once in a lifetime. I'm certain George will have some of his rich friends there. This could be my shot to get out. Then we won't be warring roomies anymore. Patricia mulled it over. The luncheon was supposed to be for staff, but maybe George might have some of his people there too. That way Mary would be too distracted to play matchmaker. When her sister was focused on fishing and a sugar daddy, nothing else mattered. So if I say yes, you won't be trying to pair me up with anyone? Or dragging me across the room? Trust me, I'll be too busy finding my own new arm candy. Which I know makes you giddy, so stop trying to play stoic. We might be different as night and day, but we're still sisters. So what do you say, party pooper? All this cash for one event with yours truly. Mary waved the envelope as her eyes shone with glee. Deal. Now hand it over. Patricia was willing to forgo her pride for a chance to actually pay their bills on time. With Mary around, everything cost more than ever. It was way past due for her sister to start paying her fair share. She just had to let go the fact that this jerk really had the nerve to hoard away so much money while eating her out of house and home. George had hoped that Patricia would have shown up by now. This was the fourth luncheon, and she was a no-show for the others. Perhaps he'd been too pushy with this and scared her off. He was acting like a lovesick teenager at 40. He was too surprised and ashamed to confide in anyone about his feelings. They would either pity or laugh at him. A rich man pining for a woman from the middle or working class. It was right out of a Hallmark movie, which he hated most of all. They only reminded him of what he was missing in life. There was still all the good he was doing. Reminding himself that this wasn't about his needs soothed a wounded ego. All the guests were grateful to be there. He kept it exclusively for staff, with only a few reporters mixed in. Photos were taken outside in a fervor, but inside there were strict guidelines to not bother guests. A few questions were allowed throughout the event. Otherwise, it was a time to relax and enjoy a great meal. He was naive enough not to notice just how much of an opportunity this was for the mall staff to unwind. Most could never afford to come to an exclusive restaurant like this in their lifetime. His publicist was excited upon hearing the news of the luncheon, happy that a guard spoke out about inviting everyone. She saw it as a chance to show George could evolve and learn to be more like the everyday man. He let her spin that, but thought it was ridiculous. A billionaire could never be an ordinary guy, not with all the advantages money granted him. That would be like the Queen of England pretending she lived the life of one of her maids. He went through all the usual pleasantries, waiting for the appetizers to be brought in. Minutes before that would be when the restaurant would be closed to any more entrants. That kept the atmosphere from being ruined by latecomers. The invites given out made it clear what time those who wanted to come had to arrive by. This was still a high-class place, not a fast food joint. Reservations mattered, along with respecting where they were dining. This had to be a message from the universe for him to stop delaying the inevitable. Marrying for love was not in the cards for him. If he kept waiting, then by the time he started having children, his wife would look fresh and young, while George got hailed as the new Hugh Hefner. He always cringed seeing barely legal women hanging off men who looked older than the crypt keeper. Sure, it was ageist, but that didn't make seeing that any less troubling. There was always doubt as to the true motives of both partners. The last thing he needed. "Hello, everyone!" a new voice called out as a pair of new arrivals entered. Both were black females, one ducking down as if embarrassed to be there. The one shouting was all smiles and ready to have fun in a sparkling red dress with a high slit that left little to the imagination. He always liked those who were the life of the party. They never lost a chance to bring a sense of joy and fervor wherever their presence was known. A great way to turn a bad day into a great one. Perhaps things might be looking up. Then the other female looked up and his heart nearly burst. Wearing a gray pantsuit, she looked plain but beautiful all the same. It was Patricia finally showing up. He'd kept an eye on the list of attendees, but after she still hadn't signed up after the third event, hope started to fade. This change had to be last minute since most of the other events were already full to capacity. This time slot and one other had space for more guests. Fate might actually be throwing him a bone in the romance department for once. The only question was, how would he introduce himself without looking like a creepy stalker? When everyone was seated, there was a short speech welcoming them to the luncheon, thanking the guests for finding time to come and their great service at the mall. It went by quickly, and most of the faces looked only slightly bored. They were good sports, though, smiling when needed and clapping once it was over. The appetizers came, and most dived right in. He could immediately tell who had decent table manners from those who didn't. He tried his best to ignore those who kept their elbows on the table or had no idea how to use their utensils and cloth napkins. This was a time to unwind, but his upbringing was getting in the way. The last thing he needed was to look like the out-of-touch white guy who whined about his guests not having upper-class manners. He spied Patricia over at the other side, carefully eating her meal and trying to look nothing like a caveman like barbarians around her. He appreciated that she made an effort. The woman beside her ate effortlessly. There was no question she was clued into the way of fine dining, requesting the right things from the waiter and sticking to small portion sizes. He felt silly thinking about such things around people who had so little. You could eat daintily in public when you had a personal chef at home. The woman in the red dress waved and he gave a smile, but it fell when he saw that look in her eye. One of a predator. This woman was nothing like Patricia, there to have a nice time. She was definitely looking for a new sugar daddy to leech off of. If there was anything that bothered him more than his dead love life, it was being sought after by gold diggers. "Do you think George is gay?" Mary asked, and Patricia nearly spat out the main course. He smiled at me for a second, then his face fell. It was like a bucket of cold water was thrown in his face. Maybe I had something in my teeth. She pulled out a compact mirror and started checking her pearly whites, completely focused on finding a new man to be by her side. Patricia did her best to ignore Mary. In her mind, the poor man saw Mary's real intent from a mile away. Men who were wealthy and 40 knew who the women who went after them were. Those who wanted money and those who wanted that, plus being the next missus. She had seen enough television to know how most of those worked out, usually ending in ugly divorces or worse. It was a relief that Mr. Kent wasn't looking for another temporary lay, especially with her sister, which made the night guard's skin crawl. How Mary could debase herself to be nothing more than a guy's plaything was beyond her understanding. Maybe it's because I'm too dark. Men like this enjoy having a light-skinned woman on their arm, lessens the chance of having babies that look too different from them. Mary went on. Patricia did her best not to throttle the ignorant girl beside her. Anyone who thought like that wasn't worth going after. Racism was still alive and well. Worse, black people like her sister embraced it and tried to change themselves to fit in. She had a good mind to throw out all Mary's bleaching creams and have a good old showdown about race and equality. "Please stop talking. I don't need to hear that asinine rhetoric right now, Mary." "Fine, be alone for the rest of your life. See if I care," Mary pouted. When there was a break, Mary stormed off before Patricia could even rise from her chair. There would be hell to pay later on, but if she could get some peace and stretch her legs, it was worth it. She loved Mary, but some of her values were just dead wrong. Hating black babies was just a terrible way to think. "Maybe I should go freshen up," she mused. "Excuse me, are you Patricia Williams?" A bodyguard built like a tank walked up. Why on earth would this man need to talk to her, much less know a random woman's full name? If Mary did something stupid to get them thrown out, she would put that idiot on the streets. "Yes, may I ask what's happened?" Patricia put on her most polite voice. If anything was wrong, being on her best behavior might help mitigate some of the blowback. "Everything's fine, ma'am. Mr. Kent is requesting a word with you. He's waiting by the lobby. I can escort you there right now." Patricia raised an eyebrow. Could this be the moment George told her off for speaking out of turn? She never thought it would be in public. But then again, you never knew what to expect with these white folks. Better to get this over with. "Lead the way." Upon entering the lobby, she saw a nervous man pacing instead of an angry one. His face lit up when he saw her. What should have been a moment of relief instead had her on edge. Why was this rich stranger so happy to see a woman he didn't know? "What's going on? I know this is awkward, but I just need a moment of your time." George escorted her to a more secure wing. "Right. You better tell me what this is right now. I'm grateful for the luncheon, but I'm not doing anything weird." George's face went redder than a tomato. It took a moment before he could speak. I'm sorry if my actions startled you. I was hoping to ask you something in private. Your +1 seems to be having a great time, by the way. What my sister does is none of your business. Besides, she thinks you're gay. Why would she think that? George raised an eyebrow. Patricia shrugged. She's not your type or something. I couldn't care less. Oh, I guess that's her opinion, George said. I was wondering if you would like to go on a walk with me. Patricia looked around. Am I being punked? Are there secret cameras in here? I suck at this. I want to ask you out on a date. But I was trying to not be creepy. Clearly, I've failed. George sighed. Patricia burst out laughing. After worrying she might get kidnapped or having to beat a white man up, this was all about going on a date with her. Tell me this is a joke. It's not, trust me, the bodyguard said, and he looked as mortified as his boss. George took a deep breath and started rambling, telling Patricia about the first time saw her, that he thought she was beautiful and captivating. He did research to find out more and discovered her love for activism and her community, which only made him more anxious to meet face to face, that his love life was dead, and that liking her surprised him as well. Then he just hung his head and apologized for wasting her time, but begged for a chance to make things right, suggesting a walk and leaving his number for her to decide if they would ever meet again. Okay, Patricia agreed. Really? George perked up.
Chapter 3. Patricia decided not to tell Mary right away. The last she needed right now was romance advice, or worse, sex tips. George rejected her sister's advances, making it clear he wasn't looking for a quick fling. She was still unsure where this road was going to take her. After swearing off dating, this was the last thing she expected. A man who was able to make her consider taking a leap of faith. If things didn't work, then it would have been an adventure well spent. With his reputation, she doubted he would do anything dubious to be outed as a jerk. The risk of heartbreak was still there. She'd tried before to see if dating could work before turning away from it altogether. You could try not to get attached, but that chance wasn't in any person's control. People got attached or close due to a variety of circumstances. If she and George went there but ended up not being compatible, that would be more proof that romance wasn't in the cards for her. In the end, it was her choice to take the plunge or not. Either way, she would be able to move on, business as usual. George had put the ball in her court, a decision which was surprising. Men usually wanted to be in charge. As a billionaire businessman, she had no doubt he was a take-charge type of person. Yet he put the choice in her hands and took a step back. Despite their strange meeting, that was something to be respected. He was shy and out of practice as well. Confessing to be out of his depth was unexpected but intriguing. She would have thought of him as a suave Casanova before they met, which showed it was bad to prejudge people. On the one hand, she had the opportunity of a lifetime. Most women would never get to date a billionaire. To be treated and cared for like a queen at that level. Then again, that wasn't what she was interested in. Sure, having someone with means treating her for a bit wasn't terrible, but what would he expect in return? Sure, he was nice now, but that could change. She'd seen firsthand how a man could turn from a considerate partner into a monster. The last thing she wanted was to be caught off guard if George turned out to be awful. Then again, there was the question of what would happen if they did get closer. George wasn't going to throw away his riches to live with her in this community. His high profile alone would make such a move a bad idea. Billionaires like him needed security around almost all the time. Was she ready to be under a microscope with him and leave her home behind? Then there was all the press and drama that came with an everyday woman being with a man like him. She shuddered at the thought of being chased by paparazzi. Guard or not, she knew those people could be relentless and vicious. Practicing self-defense could only do so much. Work continued as usual. Her fear of repercussion was unfounded. All the employees were so happy to attend the luncheon, they forgot all about her outburst. The few who didn't were grateful that everyone got an invite, which meant there was no way she would get fired. It was a relief that things were going back to normal. In a few weeks, the mall would be closed to get the renovations done. They were all given a month's paid leave. If things went beyond that, then temporary jobs might have to be taken on until the business reopened. She was glad that the mall was getting a facelift. Sure, she was skeptical at first, but it seemed George truly wanted to help. Plus, anything that helped draw in more customers was good for everybody. The mall helped create jobs, a safe place to hang out, and had a few community events every year. She always volunteered and even received a plaque 2 years ago for her ongoing service. That was one of the proudest moments of her life. Helping others and her city be the best they could be was a purpose in life no one could take away. Being a guard wasn't glamorous, but she was proud having this job. Keeping people safe was in her blood. After all her bad experiences, it felt good to protect others. Her job was mostly about physically keeping the peace, but she also believed it offered inner comfort to the shoppers, knowing that if things went wrong, there were trained people ready to help. Sure, there were cops, but when things get dicey, mall security was the first line of defense. Being herself mattered a lot, and it seemed George was interested in that. She had no time to pretend to be anything other than an independent woman. Playing the damsel was not in her DNA. Hopefully this billionaire understood that and didn't try to be overly protective. Then again, he seemed way too nervous on their initial meeting to ever dare be that guy. Of course, looks could always be deceiving. Whatever the future had in store, she was ready to take it on. George was just one new person in her already happy life. Romance wasn't a one-way street for her. There were so many things out there waiting to be discovered. She planned to live life to the fullest, whether this date with a billionaire worked out or not. Being with a man wasn't part of her identity. She was nothing like Mary, who needed someone by her side to feel important. Patricia was a woman ready to take a chance at love, but she was also a female with a purpose that went beyond having a partner, a fact she was proud of with all her heart. Patricia stared at the number before pressing the call button. Alone in her apartment was the perfect time to act. After mulling it over a few days, she figured a meet couldn't hurt. She wasn't going to rush things, but didn't want to come off as too standoffish. "Hello, is this Mr. Kent?" "Patricia, I'm glad it's you, and please, call me George." The voice over the other line was ecstatic. If there was any doubt this was real, that was over now. Time to move forward with it. As the saying went, life favored the bold. At least that better be the case right now. Patricia clutched her phone. It was silly feeling nervous over having a conversation. Then again, the reality of talking to a billionaire was starting to hit hard. He was a man able to get any woman and chose a mall security guard. What was the angle? The last thing she needed was to be proven wrong about yet another man. "I thought we could meet up and talk. This isn't a date, mind you," she was sure to add. Not ready to go that far just yet. The line was quiet for a long moment. Concern started to rise that he'd gotten offended and hung up. "I'll take what I can get. You could have decided not to call at all, so I'm not complaining." A chuckle showed he was being open, but the silence was still a sticking point. What did it mean, and would their meeting fizzle out because her word choice offended him? Patricia was still getting used to the idea of being around a man who wasn't a long-time acquaintance. Passing strangers was one thing, but she going to be around a man who liked her and would sooner or later want more. Was it the best idea to go with the flow on this one? Was he the kind of guy who took rejection well if things didn't go well between them? The only way to find out was to get to know him better, which was the scariest part of all. Yes, I guess agreeing to another meeting is better than nothing. How about tomorrow afternoon? I know you're a busy man and probably have a lot of scheduling to handle. Don't worry about that. Text me the place and I'll come unless there are security concerns. The bodyguards will keep their distance, George told her. He sounded happy and breathless, as if talking to her took everything out of him. That wasn't usually how men reacted around her. A part of her felt giddy having such an effect on an older man. "See you soon? Goodbye, George." Patricia hung up, then burst into a fit of giggles. She felt so dumb acting like a schoolgirl over having one phone call with a man. Any worse, and she would become a carbon copy of her sister. No man was worth such a fate. Patricia waited in a private booth at the cafe she chose. At first, she wanted to sit out front, which was what she usually did when alone or with friends. But George explained that wasn't possible for him. She felt silly looking back about not considering that he was a public figure. People knew the famous billionaire, and with the donation to the community, it would be impossible for most locals not to have passing knowledge of him and what he looked like up close. Mary claimed only lonely and desperate women hung around cafes, that they were grab-and-go locations for true ladies. The amount of sexism and ego in that statement was definitely nauseating. Patricia wanted to strangle her own blood so much. Why did people have to add negative connotations to things that didn't interest them? All kinds of individuals frequented this type of establishment. A great environment to relax alone, hang out with friends, or meet someone new. To diminish that just for a moment of superiority was sad and selfish. Patricia ordered an espresso and tried to relax. The hustle and bustle around her had a small relaxing effect. Remembering other people were around going about their regular lives helped take some of the edge off. This was just a normal afternoon. It was a work night, so she had no intention of chatting for hours on end. She wouldn't have done that if she was free either. Now was the time to feel George out and look out for any signs of trouble. If there was none, then perhaps they could meet again in the future. A fact she didn't dread completely, which was a good sign. Arriving early so that she could grab the best booth seemed a good idea at the time. An extra tip to a waitress helped keep the booth reserved. Now she wasn't so sure. Would it look desperate to any security scoping out the place in advance before letting George enter? It was silly mulling over that while waiting, but her mind was on overdrive. Saying there was no date wasn't the same as believing it. Patricia was veering between calmness and a nervous wreck at a breakneck pace. Why did she delude herself into thinking hanging out with a man she just met was a good idea? Who really just saw someone once and thought they were special enough to hold a luncheon just to lure them in? I have to get out of here. But Patricia couldn't bring herself to get up and go, no matter how much her brain was screaming to get moving. She didn't need a man in her life, but George wasn't trying to force a relationship. In fact, he wanted to talk and get to know her first. That had to mean something more than just a quick infatuation. If that was what he wanted, then why not accept Mary's advances? A man wanting an uncomplicated relationship with a beautiful woman would love to date her sister. Sure, Mary could sometimes pick the worst of the lot, but men were always interested. When George turned away from Mary, a part of her was very relieved. An unfamiliar man peeked into the booth. Before she could protest, he identified himself as a bodyguard in civilian clothes. After looking around and running a device over her and the space searching for bugs, the man gave the all-clear and slipped out. She was shocked at just how thorough they were about keeping George safe. This kind of action was straight out of a movie. Hopefully things wouldn't go awry just to keep things interesting. If anything else went wrong, she might not be able to stop herself from bolting right out the door. "Ma'am, a man is here saying he's the guest you wanted to see. Should I send him in?" the waitress asked. Patricia smiled, knowing it had to be George. Who else would be that formal at a cafe? It was kind of sweet how politely he behaved. Had to be part of that upper-class upbringing. "Yes, and I would like to order a meatball submarine and a Coke." She tried to look neutral as the waitress left to deliver her order and confirm that Mr. Kent could come in. George slipped inside wearing a beige overcoat, hat, and sunglasses. When he removed the latter too, she was surprised to see he had on a fake beard and contacts. The redness on his face showed this was not a fun thing for him either. "If I didn't agree to this, then we couldn't meet. Not without my security team and publicist giving me hell for the rest of my life." "Your publicist knows that we're dating?" Patricia could understand the security team. They had to keep their employer safe from any credible threats. You never know who might think it was a good idea to try and kill a billionaire to send some kind of sick message. She could never forgive herself if their meeting ended with him dead. But she wasn't sure why anyone else needed to know, much less someone who curated his image for the public. "I know it sounds weird, but trust me, she needs to be in on nearly every aspect of my life. I wish I could explain all the inner workings of being a wealthy businessman with familial obligations and an image to uphold for the world. But we would be here for days, and I want to spend our time getting to know each other better." George gave a warm smile. Right then, the waitress returned with their orders. Patricia was surprised to see he'd ordered a milkshake and fries. The way his eyes lit up, she could tell that this wasn't the food he usually ate. She bit into her sandwich as George ate his meal with glee she only saw in children. Perhaps the life of a wealthy businessman wasn't so perfect after all. "I haven't had fries in years. My chef refuses to make them, and my parents scared the dickens out of my security team enough to make them not sneak me junk food. You would think at 40 I could eat as I please." George went on about his limited eating habits. "What do? Force you to eat kale and salads?" Patricia teased. It was funny seeing a man of so much prestige whine about not getting his fast food fix. Despite being from a different world, he was just like anyone else in the most funny of ways. "Har har, I wasn't raised by barbaric vegans." George rolled his eyes. He did beg her to get extra fries with a water. When it arrived, one of bodyguards had the tray, stating that this was the last treat the billionaire was going to sneak past them. He frowned but relented with a sigh. Patricia was surprised that they were so strict about their boss keeping a proper diet. After eating, George started asking about her childhood, curious about that part of her life was like. Patricia told him about always having to be the more responsible one. That her parents expected more from her and let Mary off the hook a lot. They were disappointed when she decided to become a mall security guard. She hadn't seen them years and had no regrets cutting ties outside of rare phone calls. In the end, she could never be the daughter they wanted while Mary got all the breaks despite making so many mistakes, especially if there were men and money involved. It was a never-ending cycle she refused to take part in. George stated that he had a great childhood, with friends, a top-notch education, and ways to unwind. The only thing that bothered him was how much his parents were away. He understood they were working and wealthy, but he wished they'd been around more while growing up. But life was still great, with never having to want for anything material and learning the ropes of being a proper Kent man. The reverence he had for his family touched Patricia. Even if they weren't there like he preferred, George respected his family's legacy. Patricia went on to explain that she wasn't a romantic, that all the heartbreak and betrayal in her life took that away. Mary was the complete opposite, looking for relationships in every corner. But she'd put that dream aside for the most part. It was sad that men had ruined their chances with her by being dominating and monstrous. She didn't think that loving another person was stupid or impossible. Anyone who found happiness with their significant other deserved it. She was just unsure if all the risk was worth it after what she experienced. "I'm so sorry. Men can be beasts, there's no doubt about that." George went on to tell of his own tragic experience with love. Losing his childhood sweetheart crushed him. In your 20s, you felt invincible, and losing his fiancée shattered that fact. He was bedridden for months and had to stay indoors for nearly a year under supervision. Counseling and family support saved his life. During the worst, all he could think about was getting back to her. It was after he started getting better that the realization hit that his love would never want him to die, but instead to be the best person he could be, even if that meant moving on. Patricia dabbed her eyes with a napkin. She had no idea that George would have suffered so much. To love someone so deeply you couldn't go on without them sounded straight out of a fairy tale. But so did dating a billionaire. So perhaps fiction still had just enough facts to be believable. She was glad he got better and never took his life. "I'm sorry you lost her."
"Yes, but I'm glad we get to meet. Don't feel pressured to continue seeing me if you don't want to. I'm not looking for pity," George told her.
"I know, but are you sure about me? I'm not exactly a catch," Patricia sighed.
"Says who? You got this billionaire's head turning at first sight. I've been around the most beautiful women in the world, and none of them could make me find love again. Trust me, Patricia, you're more precious than anything on this earth," George declared. Patricia blinked back tears. If someone had told her this was possible, she would have laughed in their face. A man pouring his heart out and telling her she was special all in one go. "I never thought you would say that. Why are you telling me this?"
"Because it's true. Patricia, I really like you, but if things don't work out, I'll be fine. My parents will help arrange a union if I don't find a companion my heart desires," George told her.
Patricia froze. That was the last thing she expected to hear. Sure, there were stories about arranged marriages, but she never saw George as the type. "Don't worry, both parties would be willing. I'm not forcing some poor woman to be hitched to my hip. I just don't want to grow old alone. It might sound pathetic, but it's the truth." Patricia patted his arm. "That's not a bad thing. People find love however they can. I would never presume to understand the reasons you need companionship."
"Well, I hope this U-turn hasn't turned you off from seeing me again. I know you're not ready to date, but if we can keep having friendly talks like this, I'm happy and that's enough."
George held her hand. Patricia felt butterflies in her stomach, both because of her shifting feelings and the joy of knowing George also valued their friendship, whether or not they took the romantic route.
Chapter 4. It was a month later before Patricia decided it was time to take up George's offer for a date. They'd met up several more times just to talk. Being around him was a breath of fresh air, but deep down she knew a decision had to be made. Stringing along a guy who wanted more was never a good thing. Thankfully, she started feeling evidence of a spark, one that could do with further exploring. The thought of sending him away made her queasy, which was a good sign. She was still unsure if they were in it for the long haul, but she wanted to try, and that meant everything. George was elated when she brought it up. This time, she let him pick the place as a sign of trust. If they were going to start dating, both had to believe neither was a potential basket case or kidnapper. She was taking a big step in this next level between them. If things went south, it was highly likely neither could face each other in the future. Exes, even when amicable, usually went their separate ways. But she felt the risk was worth finding out if George might be her soulmate. Romance was finally in the air and she was nervous but excited. If George was truly the man for her, then there was no loss going forward. He was a kind, loving, and open person. The money wasn't what mattered to her. Finding a man who wasn't intimidated by her independence mattered as well. So far, George was just glad they were together. A feeling she could agree was shared in equal measure. The idea of finding love in her 30s was suddenly appealing. Women were made to feel as if they needed to get married right away. That every year after hitting adulthood meant you were closer to being a lonely spinster or cat lady. It was a terrible stereotype that society allowed to run rampant. Men were allowed to play the field and be known as studs. Females who tried the same were tramps and whores. Telling Mary was the scariest part. She wanted to ensure a level of certainty before involving her sister. So far, their relationship had stayed quiet. The locations chosen were perfect for not attracting the attention of the paparazzi. But in irony, it was her friends who were starting to notice. Regulars who recognized their friend or favorite security guard couldn't miss the fact that she was meeting with a person who stayed hidden. They asked questions varying from if the mystery person was a boyfriend, a weird friend, or even someone from witness protection. Sooner or later, someone was going to try to intervene only to get tackled by his security. It made her laugh, but George was actually a bit worried about that. Mary squealed and congratulated Patricia upon getting the news. Her sister then took complete credit for the union, stating that keeping the hope alive allowed the mopey security guard a chance to find love. Presuming George had been standoffish at the luncheon because he was trying to get Patricia's attention, she then milked her big sister on every detail, only slightly annoyed about not being informed from the onset, and grudgingly accepting the excuse that the pair wanted to be sure before sharing the news with others. Patricia had to beg Mary not to tell anyone else. She still wanted to maintain a level of privacy. Things between her and George were going well. The last thing they needed was the relationship splashed across the front pages of magazines and websites. That would bring in the hounds, turning their lives upside down. George was used to that as a billionaire, but she wasn't. Some people might be willing to throw away their privacy for fame, but not her. The quiet life was something she cherished, and giving that up had to be worth it. George wanted to make their first date a surprise, only telling her to wear a little black dress if she had one or something navy blue. Not used to being told how to dress, she decided to go with it this once. He hadn't ordered her, it was more of a polite suggestion. All she knew was that it would be at a restaurant out of town. She'd started her time off recently and had the night free, a strange occurrence after years of employment. She decided to go with the flow and see where this new path would take her. Patricia went about getting herself ready by going to a hairstylist for a fashion-forward updo. Anyone who recognized her on the way home was shocked. She hadn't gotten herself this dolled up in years. It made her both thrilled and self-conscious. Back at her apartment, there was a package waiting. Taking it upstairs, she was surprised to see 3 beautiful dresses, 2 little black dresses and 1 ankle-length blue number. She tried them on, and only the blue dress didn't fit. Checking, she noticed the size was better suited for Mary. With a grin, she left it on the sofa for Mary to find. She didn't keep up with brands, but was sure her sister would flip. There were also 2 pairs of shoes, one nude and the other black, both low-heeled. She was glad George was smart enough not to send her neck-breaking high heels. Patricia was ready by the time the limo came to pick her up. She blushed when the bodyguard in the back whistled upon seeing her. Heads had turned the second she left the apartment. Hopefully was a good sign for the evening to come. George had paid the restaurant to release everyone after cooking the main courses. It was nothing for him to buy out an establishment for the night. The real work was getting the owners to agree to remove all staff and replace it with his own cooking staff and security. Businesses had to be careful about who they allowed to do this. No one wanted to be held liable in case things went sideways, which was understandable. But he wanted to keep his relationship with Patricia private. She wasn't used to the public life like he was. Plus, it was nice keeping their circle of confidants small. Gave them the ability to get closer naturally. He was shocked to have found another chance at love. The plan to go through with an arranged marriage seemed like a dream. There was always the chance Patricia ended up not feeling the same. She wasn't wowed by his money or willing to put her happiness aside. But that was what he loved about her. A woman with a fire of her own, ready to take on the world. As a businessman, he understood the importance of having goals and the drive to achieve them. Patricia was determined to live her best life with or without a man. As a romantic, he couldn't completely divorce himself from the idea of love. But after such a devastating loss in his 20s, the hope of finding a new love died with each failure in the relationship department. For him, Patricia was a miracle he didn't see coming. Her willingness to get to know him proved she was a wonderful person. Opening her heart to him was proof that the universe was giving George another chance. He just had to take the leap after losing out on love before. There was no way this billionaire was going to let it pass him by. Everything had to be perfect. Patricia wanted a night out, but he wanted it to be magical. A mall security guard could only enjoy so much luxury. But he knew she was a prideful woman used to taking care of herself. Tonight, he wanted to wow her the best way possible. She came from nothing compared to his life, but he knew better than to let that be his jumping point. Making her happy was one thing. Having her think he was showing off was another. Sending the gifts was a calculated risk. She would either accept or refuse them, hopefully without feeling pushed into wearing what he wanted. He just wanted her to feel a part of his world. If he only wanted to have a sexy lady on his arm, her sister would be the obvious choice. A woman learned in the art of fine dining and hunting men. Patricia was nothing like that, and he was grateful. Rich men like himself were taught at an early age to be on the lookout. There were always people ready to use them for what could be gained. His kitchen staff started working on preparing the cooked courses to be presented when Patricia arrived. He knew they were curious as to who was having dinner with him, but only a select few were allowed to present meals to them. His servants were well-trained and trustworthy. An important part of being from a rich business family who prided themselves on staying out of the tabloids. One bad servant could lose them millions, whether in cash or connections that lost faith in them because of leaked secrets or terrible rumors. The bodyguards were hired from a company his family co-owned for decades. All those employed through it were highly vetted and well-trained, which was a must in order for them to do their job. One mistake was the difference between an assignment's success or failure. That sometimes meant tangling with life or death. He had death threats and beat having close encounters thanks to great security. But his father had gotten shot in his 30s, and it was a terrifying time for the family, making George never forget that life was full of dangers. Money could buy many things, but it couldn't bring you back to life once you were gone. Being a billionaire was nothing to stick your nose out at. It afforded you many advantages in life, and he was grateful for all of them. His legacy allowed him to have the world at his disposal, an advantage he never allowed himself to forget. Like most, he went through a spoilt stage, but grew out of it, which was why being in activism was so important. It reminded him that there were those who needed help, that burying his head in the sand to enjoy his money would be irresponsible. Plus, it led him to the new love of his life. The time for Patricia's arrival was minutes away, and he struggled to stay still, pacing every few minutes with well-placed guards watching his every move. The room suddenly felt claustrophobic. Would she feel the same way upon arriving? Perhaps it was his nerves, but he wanted to impress her. A date was more than he could have hoped for. With it in his grasp, all he wanted was to ensure Patricia had a great time. The restaurant was ready, so it had to be his frazzled nerves acting up. "Everything will be okay, boss. She really seems to like you." One of his bodyguards smiled as he sat down at the table again. Unlike a lot of rich men, he had a close relationship with his staff. They could speak freely and never feared being fired for telling him the truth. It saddened him that not all employers felt this was the way to treat their workers. "You're right. This old man just wants everything to be perfect." George sighed. In all honesty with Patricia, even willing to breathe in his direction, everything was already perfect. Patricia walked into a building blindfolded. It took several minutes before she agreed to that. The nerve of the security waiting until they were in the underground parking lot to reveal this stipulation. She tried to wriggle her way out of it, but George wanted the first thing for her to see was him inside the restaurant. Finally, the bodyguard held up a cell for her to call the date off. Doing that would crush George, who only wanted to make her happy. Hopefully, this one incident wasn't a harbinger of things to come. She liked to see what was coming. Love always had a price. Right now, it was her trust. Though she was going on a date with a billionaire, so most might think it was an overreaction not to wear a simple blindfold. But for someone like her, it was more than that. After what she'd been through, entering a romantic relationship was difficult. Starting with her eyes covered was horrifying and a reminder that George's life was worlds different. What he considered a fun surprise she saw as a move straight out of a horror movie. Even Mary might hesitate to comply with a move like this. When the blindfold was removed, she was in awe. The restaurant looked straight out of a movie with sparkling chandeliers and vaulted ceilings. All the tables were hexagon-shaped, painted gold with white chairs. George sat in the middle with a huge grin on his face. There was no doubt he was proud of himself for setting this up. But then his face fell. "What's wrong, Patricia? Why do you look so pale?" The concern on his face as he walked up broke her heart. "She wasn't a fan of the blindfold, sir," one of the men escorting her revealed. George's face looked like a kicked puppy. She hadn't planned on saying anything, but there was no way of hiding the truth. "Sorry, I should have taken that under more consideration. I swear it completely flew past me that it might be an issue for you." Patricia put on a brave face. "I know, it was an accident. I'm fine, just not used to first dates going like that. Don't worry, George, I'm not going anywhere because of one snafu." "That's good to know. I promise the food will be much better." George pulled out her chair. Patricia smiled and took a seat. Hopefully she could salvage this date. George looked so guilty it hurt. She wasn't used to a date being so concerned about her well-being. It was more than just being raised right or rich. He genuinely felt awful for scaring her, a fact that made her feel a bit better. If he cared enough not to criticize her, that meant he understood this was a serious concern and not a frivolous thing to cast away. "I'm famished. Thank you for the gifts, by the way. Hope I put them to good use." Patricia decided to wear the little black dress with the silver belt. She felt like a model in that outfit, along with the nude shoes, and adding a silver clutch and black chunky necklace from her own things, helping her feel more like this outfit was truly hers. Combined with the hair and makeup she swiped from her sister, she looked like a total knockout and felt powerful. Not that she didn't like how she usually looked in plain clothes, but this was a fun change. George smiled and sat up straight. "I'm glad you liked them. Honestly, I wondered if it was too much sending them. I just wanted to do something nice for you. Probably been out of the dating game too long to know when to quit." His bashfulness was sweet. There was nothing greater than a man willing to blush in the open. He looked at Patricia, then down at his feet with a chuckle. "We're coming off a bit of a rocky start, but I think there's still hope for the night yet. Perhaps I have too much enthusiasm, but at 40, I think I can shoot for the stars." Patricia laughed and patted his arm. He was so delightful and shy it was almost painful. Where had men like this been hiding? No brutish bravado from him or demands of supplication from her. Had she not been looking hard enough? Or was she just on a train of relationship hell before George showed up in his limo and glimpsed her outside the mall? If Hallmark movies were made by black people, perhaps her story could make a great plot. A black female mall cop whisked away from a life of obscurity by a white billionaire looking for true love after losing his fiancée at a young age. "You're one of a kind, George." The food was brought forward. The appetizer was delicious and both had multiple servings. Nothing was out of reach, and there were multiple options available. Every dish looked like a work of art, almost too precious to eat. With money being no object, they got to enjoy eating to their heart's content. "So these servers are under some kind of contract to not talk about us?" Patricia decided to ask. She'd started wondering as they ate. One even winked at her in passing, almost as if they knew her already. While she was glad to not be on their first date in a ghost town with just her, George, and the bodyguards, she still noticed the empty seats and the reality of their relationship still being a secret. Was there any personal reason George was so okay with it? "Oh, I'm sorry. They're part of my kitchen staff. I bought out the restaurant for tonight and had the cameras turned off. The restaurant staff cooked the food, then left. Don't worry, Patricia. I took every precaution. As long as I can help it, we will keep this quiet until things are sure and you're ready to go public." George's understanding was both reassuring and troubling, like the calm before the storm, though she wasn't sure how to explain that. "Well, that's good, so we can have a great date without anyone knowing." Patricia was unsure why this bothered her. This was what she wanted. Privacy to date while making the decision about whether or not George was her soulmate. But instead, her brain was going in all sorts of directions. She wanted to focus on their date, but these doubts kept creeping in. George tilted his head. Despite her best efforts, he wasn't happy like before. "Do you think I'm ashamed of you?" She couldn't look him in the eye, and her date let out a sigh. "I know that the past hasn't been kind to you. I also had a bad run with love, but your pain was ongoing for years. I can't change the past. But I can promise you that if I wasn't happy with being with you, I wouldn't be here. My future was an arranged marriage before meeting you. The last thing I would do is give up a comfy arrangement for a bad fling with anyone. Patricia wiped her eyes. She felt so silly thinking any of that was possible. Yes. She'd taken a risk going out with George, but he bet everything just trying to talk to her the first time. Both were trying to re-enter the dating pool, which was never easy. Yet he always tried to accommodate her no matter what happened. She was doing her best to do the same. Thank you. I just need to get used to trusting a man in a relationship. George nodded and they continued eating. The rest of their date was focused on talking about happier things, including work and their latest acts of activism. Patricia was excited about a clothing drive for gay youth, and George suggested sponsoring a tune-up for their vans, since a few were having engine trouble. He was happy with how renovations were starting with the mall, mostly checking in via video chat because of his busy schedule. As their date came to an end, George requested that they have a dance. Patricia was glad to accept as staff moved furniture around to create space. A few slow jams were played from various genres, including jazz and classical. George always kept an appropriate distance as they swayed and laughed on the dance floor. Can I take your merriment as a sign that we'll be seeing each other again? George spun her around with a grin. Yes, I think we truly have a shot at romance. Patricia jokingly bounced him with her butt. Well, I wasn't expecting us getting so frisky this soon, George teased and kissed her hand. Patricia pulled George forward and kissed him on the lips. Lesson 1, my dear. Women are full of surprises.
Chapter 5. George was on cloud 9. 5 dates later, and he was pretty sure that Patricia was the one. After decades of losing faith in love, it found him in the most unexpected way. Life was supposed to give you just one soulmate. Thankfully, that rumor seemed to be untrue. He soon needed to tell his family that the arranged marriage was no longer needed, but didn't want to do that before Patricia was ready to meet them or go public. He was still getting used to figuring out her needs and not overstepping to the point she got uncomfortable. Patricia had started opening up more, which was a good thing. He still felt terrible about frightening her with the blindfold. His staff had no idea she would be that upset either. The bodyguards apologized multiple times. They were used to people resisting requests and security measures. But she was genuinely thrown by the demand, and he never wanted to make that mistake again. At least they were moving past it and taking things to the next level. With past relationships going from poor to awful, it was lucky they were together. Now they were getting closer, which was a good thing. But that was also the riskiest time. Anything could come between them. They were from 2 different worlds. Not just in status, but also in race, upbringing, and romantic relationships. He'd never been an abuser or victim. The fact that Patricia was the latter broke his heart and made his blood boil all at once. Any man who would mistreat a woman was scum. Using miscarriages to make her feel worse was just monstrous. If he saw any of those bad exes, he might not be able to control himself. They were all cowards and deserved to spend the rest of their lives in hell. Then there was the issue of children. He had yet to bring it up because of Patricia's past. The only good thing was that at least she wanted children. It was sad to hear about her failed attempts of trying to adopt as a single woman. Society placed a lot of unfair pressure on females. He did want children, biological ones preferably. But he would never let that personal belief come in the way of their love. Once everything was certain, they could talk about various options, including surrogacy. She never said anything bad about that. He wanted their relationship to work and was willing to do anything to make that happen. His world allowed him many things, but he knew losing Patricia would mean never having a soulmate in his life. After his time with her, it would be damn near impossible to enter a loveless marriage now. Losing her would be equivalent to a shot through the heart. Life had no guarantees, but he truly wanted their relationship to last for the long run. Anything less would be a death song to any chance of him finding the love of a lifetime. So are you done daydreaming? Cynthia Barnes, his publicist, spoke with an amused look on her face. She stood across his desk, flipping through her phone without looking. As usual, she looked immaculate, without a hair out of place. She was sharp and never missed a detail. I've been standing here for almost 5 minutes and you've been holding that folder, except your eyes are looking at the wall. If you have X-ray vision, that's something I need to be informed about. Not just for personal reasons, but also to see if you want to be a superhero. Funny. George threw aside the folder. He was fantasizing about his girlfriend at work, which he found both a relief for having Patricia and embarrassing because he was 40 years old acting like a teenage boy. Telling employees and business partners that you were divided mentally because of a new relationship wasn't the way to maintain confidence. My mind was preoccupied. Is there anything you need to tell me about? Besides the fact that you might be leaving me to take a tour on the comedy circuit? I'm sure you'll knock them dead.
They could never pay me like you can. But thanks for dropping more career options. Let's see how much that helps my wage go up when my contract is up for renewal in 2 years. Might regret playing smart when I smash another record, Mr. Kent, Cynthia said.
There was no argument. Anyone who didn't pay what she was worth lost her. He'd seen it happen before, getting her in his employ. The first 3 years she wasn't exclusive, but she did such a great job while juggling other clients that he was willing to pay any price to get her on his team. Cynthia went on to update him on the latest trends and business appointments, barely having to eye her phone, which was always on her. It was insured for hundreds of thousands of dollars with serious encryption to keep its secrets from being found if stolen. There were 3 backups kept in storage, backed up regularly and replaced every few years to stay up to date with the latest technology. Still, those were replaceable. Cynthia was not. There was even an attempted kidnapping once, but she was calm since it was her 4th, and the attempt only happened under Kent's employ once. A second time meant a full overhaul of security and a pay bump. Otherwise, their contract would be nullified and she walked.
So, are you going to explain why you've been so dazed recently? I can take a wild guess, but it's better when you confess those inner thoughts. Cynthia had a way of dragging out secrets without trying. One conversation with her was like talking to a friendly spy. Unless you were better, she was going to get everything out of you with ease. Most didn't even realize she'd gotten to them until long after. She was worth more than enough to keep. George was in no hurry to reveal his secrets, but he knew she'd already guessed. After all, she was among the few who knew Patricia. That wasn't something worth keeping secret from someone with such eagle-eyed precision. Besides, she had to keep him on top of everything. Leaving her out of the loop was impossible and worse, problematic. With all that he'd revealed, if he started keeping secrets, she might think he was into something illegal, which was also an act that would nullify their contract. She didn't work with criminals. Why don't you take a guess? I like watching your Terminator mind work things out. Say artificial intelligence. That movie came out over 20 years ago, making it old as the dinosaurs by today's standards. Cynthia sighed. She always worked hard to keep him looking as hip to modern lingo as possible, without coming off as the creepy old guy trying to hang out with the youth. This is about the new lady in your life. The one security said you freaked out by blindfolding her. If you asked me, I would have said someone with a dicey love life like hers might not be into blindly walking around for a first date. Really, George? George sighed, not wanting to be reminded of that. It was a mistake. Even security feels bad. Can you be right and not give me a lecture at the same time? He sounded like a child, but that incident really bothered him. Patricia had looked pale as a ghost upon her arrival. Hey, she's still with you, so everything must be forgiven. So when are we going to be sure she's in it for the ring? Cynthia got straight to the point. At his age, the publicist felt a relationship that went on for years without marriage might look dubious. He sent her away when it was first said, upset at the insinuation, but upon reflection realized she was right. Over 40 most rich guys who weren't permanent bachelors had either got married or lived the life of jumping from one woman to the other. His brand had him as a faithful traditional businessman. A person juggling women, even one in public, was bad for business. I don't know when she'll be ready and I can't force it. George sighed, knowing Cynthia would not like that answer. Instead of giving another lecture, Cynthia shut off her phone. A shocking rarity. Listen, I'm happy for you. I'm 32 with twin daughters and the nicest ex-husband in the world. Personally, I want you to grab love with both hands. But as your publicist and handler, I have to warn you that this can be a dynamite kit that blows up in your face. If it's private, you'll have time to heal. Public, and you need to disavow and get that arranged marriage done quickly. I know that's not what you want to hear, but Patricia better be worth the risk. George sighed and leaned back. She is. Patricia helped put more cans in another cardboard box. The food drive was going well. This time she said nothing about it to George. He was always anxious to help anonymously, but people were starting to notice that these big anonymous donations were happening more frequently. If it went on further, they would start putting 2 and 2 together, including the fact that she was present at every one of them. That along with people questioning where she was disappearing off to was enough to keep her on high alert. If the paparazzi hadn't found out about her relationship with a billionaire, she wasn't going to be outed by the community. So, Patricia, a fellow Packer called,
Are you still going to play dumb with us or finally spill the beans? My son took a picture of you heading into a black SUV with what looked like a second set of clothes. Could that be because everyone got nosy about the time you left your apartment looking all dolled up and entering a car that seemed to travel in a group? Patricia had taken precautions to throw people off the trail, including driving to a middle location where George's security picked her up in regular clothes before she changed at the final location or en route. But nothing much happened in their city, and while some moved on, others were determined to keep pushing the matter. It's not my fault this place can be so boring. People are desperate for gossip. I would think my sister would be better fodder if you wanted to talk about someone interesting. I'm the same Patricia you always knew. First of all, your sister looks down on us, so forget her. Second, we're not stupid, ma'am. You've become a lot more jovial of late. Time away from work should have you antsy, but instead there's this new glow that can only be from one thing. The room responded in kind with whistles, and she struggled to keep a straight face. Going full blush would only give them more ammunition to interrogate her with. Hopefully the rumors would die down soon. I'm not going answer rumors and baiting. All of you know I'm not easy to intimidate. If you want to believe my private business is yours, then sorry, but it's not. Me having a little fun is nothing to get carried away about. Specifics are my business, just as your privacy isn't for me to peruse at my leisure. Patricia tried to drop just enough to whet their appetite, but also be nonchalant about it. The last thing she needed was anyone finding out about George. Mary had been unusually secretive about this relationship. Not that she was complaining at all. Uppity as always, a male mumbled from the back. Too good for the local men, but ready to put out for some outsider? Since he picked you up twice, he must be loaded or work for someone who is. I would expect such things from your sister, but not you. Patricia did her best to ignore that nasty retort. Some men like to act as if every woman in sight was their property. Answering him would only lead to a pointless fight that would slow down the good work they were doing. At least he took part in charity, despite his attitude, though she suspected it was a way to get women to sleep with him. At least until he showed his true colors. Any smart woman would take off running when that happened. Shut up, you're jealous, another male said. Don't let anyone force you to say anything that's private. Patricia's always been a great example for this community. If your nasty rumors drive her away, then I'll never forgive the lot of you. No one else is like her. My hero, thank you, Patricia half teased, and the room broke out in applause. She'd earned a positive reputation, and at the right time, people stood up for that. While she could stand up for herself, a little assistance once in a while was never a bad thing. The outburst from the second male seemed to shame all questions into silence, which was a relief since she just wanted to do volunteer work in peace. There was nothing wrong with curiosity, but some people didn't want to know about her secrets for good intentions. If it came out that she was dating a billionaire, nothing would be the same. Money had a way of tearing things apart just as much as it created new opportunities. When the opportunists started pouring in, and those who were resentful turned on her, she couldn't imagine going about business as usual no matter how many still supported her. But she was happy with the way things were progressing with George. Their dates drew them closer, and she could imagine them being steady, maybe even possibly getting married one day, though she wasn't in any hurry. The memories of past bad husbands were still fresh in her mind. George was nothing like them, but she'd been fooled before. As long as he accepted that and didn't try to pressure her into a commitment she wasn't ready for, there was no reason for why their relationship couldn't continue as it currently was. Patricia finished up and went to wash up. She bumped into a male who didn't get out of her way. Excuse me, but you're blocking the path. Women like you think you're better than everyone else, but once a guy with a nice car or extra cash comes along, you're ready to spread your legs. At least your sister is honest about it, the man snarled. Patricia chucked him hard in the throat and left him choking for breath. Next time you want to bother a woman, don't pick one who works as a guard and doesn't give a damn. Patricia laughed, walking out of the play with Mary. George had scored them tickets for Hamlet, saying it was about time he met her little sister. His publicist thought the play was a great way to do that. She found that creepy, but Mary loved being under Cynthia's radar. She was apparently a famous guru for the wealthy. Some thought having someone in control of your schedule or even personal life was a good thing. That sounded more like a life under a kind version of Skynet or straight out of a future dystopian novel. Not something she had any interest in. But Mary told her that Cynthia was a big part of the Kent's life.
At the play, Mary hugged George like they were best friends. He was in disguise and her sister gave multiple compliments. They even got into a conversation about fashion trends as they waited for the play to start. It was strange seeing them get along so well, reminding Patricia that while George didn't choose Mary, she was more attuned to the world that he lived in, always wanting to have more than she had and willing to do whatever it took to get it, including becoming culturally aware of anything considered popular or of the upper crust. Their first meeting had gone off without a hitch, leaving her both relieved and jealous. Mary was attuned to George in a way she could never be. Following the latest trends wasn't for her. She just wanted to know about local news, anything important in her community, activism, and work. Everything else was need to know, and that didn't include the best dresses or plays to be seen. She didn't even understand why the actor featured as Hamlet for a week only was such a big deal. Mary had begged her not to share that information. But during the final act, a bodyguard entered with a need for him to leave urgently. George apologized before going, stating that his team wouldn't have come if it wasn't urgent. Not even he knew what it was, since the man wouldn't say inside the theater. Mary was completely okay with it, saying they would see him another time. Patricia peppered quick questions before he left. When the play ended, Mary told her to get a grip and she nearly lost it. Then she burst out laughing and they were both guffawing, looking like weirdos since they'd just watched a tragic play. They left arm in arm as happy as sisters could be. "George is great. I hope things work out between you two," Mary said on the ride home. Her sister had been a lot nicer lately, cleaning up her space since the third date and even leaving a little extra money for utilities. She wondered if it might be because of who she was dating. George hoped it was because Mary was worried he was replacing her, which was why he wanted to have this meeting now instead of later. By the way they hit it off, he was Mary's new bestie. Plus, she wanted to believe Mary had changed for good reasons. "I do too. He's so kind and tries to understand what I need. That's the kind of man I've always wanted. One who accepted me for who I am." Patricia felt as if she was in a dream, one that she hoped would never end. She was finally ready to believe that they could last forever. Even her sister was completely on board and nothing bad had happened. They could go home and talk about the day some more and get along like good siblings did. But when they arrived at the apartment, the pair froze. Waiting at the door was someone no one expected to see. Standing around looking nonchalant with a casual smirk was Ronald Drake. The ex who had conned Mary somehow found his way back to her. Patricia recovered first and slammed him against the wall. "What are you doing here, slime ball? You really have the audacity to come to my place after what you did. I should fling you down the stairs." "Whoa, Pat, I'm not here to cause trouble. What happened with Mary was a complete accident. I was scammed too and had to skip town because I got in bad with some dangerous people. When things cooled down, I came to see how my girl was but couldn't find her. I feared the worst until I heard she was with her big sister." Ronald held his hands in the air. He was mixed race with the kind of looks that drive girls crazy or worse, stupid. "Let him go, Patricia. I can defend myself," Mary ordered. "Why are you here? After leaving me penniless, you have the nerve to show up at my sister's. I have to start from scratch because of you, begging my own sister to let me live with her. That was demeaning." Patricia was surprised by Mary's words. Her sister often acted as if she was doing her a favor living there and barely paying back until recently. "Exactly," she decided to say. Ronald brushed back his curly hair. "I know things went south between us, but give me another chance. I'm staying at a motel and trying to do things right. Things will be different this time. I want to start over, maybe even get married. See? I have some of the money I lost." He presented 2 envelopes bursting with money. "Where the hell did you get that cash from?" Patricia demanded. Mary, however, squealed and jumped into his arms. "I knew you couldn't have abandoned me. Yes, I want us to be together again." "Are you serious?" Patricia gasped. "Just go inside. I'll talk with you later. Don't worry, he won't be allowed in your place. Ronald has to earn that." Mary walked off with Ronald. Like hell he will. Patricia stormed into her apartment.
Chapter 6. Patricia couldn't believe that Ronald was back. After everything that happened, she never thought he would return, much less have the audacity to come to her apartment. Why hadn't he waited downstairs? Probably was hoping for a confrontation that would push Mary into defending him. In a sense, she played right into that con artist's hands. But she hadn't been prepared to see him there acting cocky. It took everything in her not to commit serious bodily harm to the man who broke her sister's heart, leaving the young woman broke and alone. But Mary had danced right back into his arms as if nothing had happened. She'd heard stories of women returning to bad relationships. Patricia had done similar herself in the past. But this was her sister, and it was awful to watch, especially when she had no idea on how to get rid of him without losing Mary too. She'd immediately gone online to see if he had any outstanding warrants. There were none, and he'd done a short stint in prison after getting early parole for only heavens know why, since he was a known ex-con. Ronald had always been a bad egg. When Mary moved in, her sister admitted she should have known better. That word on the street was he dealt with undesirables. But he claimed that wasn't true, and she was in love. Patricia had felt bad for her sister getting conned so badly. Now she wondered just who really got conned. The way that Mary just ran back to him was troubling. Her sister could be naive, but deep down she knew Mary wasn't stupid. Worse, there was no doubt she would quit her job with all the money Ronald was giving out. Promises of him earning his way back were empty. In Patricia's mind, he was irredeemable and only around to perform another con. Worst-case scenario this time, Mary also went to prison. If that happened, she would hunt down that piece of trash and end him herself. That man hadn't returned for anything good, and she had no way of getting rid of Ronald without landing in jail herself. Just as things were going well, this had to happen. She prayed it wasn't a sign of worse things to come. The last thing she needed was more problems. She wondered about asking George, but didn't want to bother him. After just meeting her sister, it would be embarrassing to beg him to find dirt on Ronald. Plus, Mary would never forgive her for telling a popular billionaire that her boyfriend was a con artist and ex-con. The shame alone might break their relationship beyond repair. The last thing she wanted was to lose her little sister forever. No matter how different they were, the power of sisterhood was still there. Her parents were already in the rearview mirror. It would be sad if Mary was too. Patricia tried to talk to Mary about leaving Ronald, but her sister wasn't having it. He was throwing around money, and Mary had already started using up her sick days at work to be with him more. There was no question who was going to get fired soon. As long as someone was footing the tab, Mary didn't want to earn anything. It was frustrating going back to square one. Coming to live here was supposed to teach Mary to be responsible. But that barely happened, and with her worthless boyfriend back, it was almost pointless to try. Instead, she had to stay firm on Mary not bringing him over, letting her landlord know that living parasite wasn't to come near her apartment. After hearing about the man's criminal record, there was agreement there. No one wanted a con man in their building. If that guy started conning tenants, that could lead to them leaving or filing complaints with the cops. Apartments were meant to house people and make money, not the opposite. Mary didn't like that she warned the landlord, but that was one thing Patricia was never going to feel bad about. Worse, Mary kept trying to give her some of Ronald's ill-gotten money. Every refusal made her sister angrier, even going as far as stating Patricia thought she was better for having a rich boyfriend. That was untrue, but the damage had been done. There was no way to stomach taking that money knowing it wasn't earned honestly. Working hard and earning what you had was imprinted in the mall guard's DNA. Accepting bad money was giving the signal that it was okay to do the wrong thing as long as it was beneficial. That was not the kind of person she was and never intended to be for anyone. For weeks, Mary gave Patricia the cold shoulder, as if their broken relationship was her fault. She was quickly reminded why their sister bond was always fractured. Mary had no interest in listening to the hard truth, always wanting the easy way out of any problem and not earning anything. As long as someone was willing to give you stuff, why bother getting anything yourself? It was a mentality that disgusted Patricia, but her sister embraced it. After all these years, she doubted anyone could get Mary to truly change her ways. Dates with George continued, and despite the voice in Patricia's head, stating he should know, she refused to tell him about her predicament with Ronald. As long as things didn't go crazy, she could handle that clown. Worst-case scenario, the cops got involved and he was carted away. Another stint in prison might just be enough for Mary to finally lose her rose-colored glasses when it came to that jerk. However, if George got involved and Mary found out, there was nothing she could do to get her sister to forgive that act in a million years. Mary still got along with George and pretended everything was business as usual. During a Skype call, he surprised them by having Cynthia say hi and revealed he was soon going to go overseas for a while on business. Patricia was disappointed, but her sister was excited, asking a million questions and even begging to chat with Cynthia, telling the woman she was an icon. By the time the call was over, Patricia wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Every time the publicist tried to question her on current events, she got it wrong. Worse, Mary would chime in with the right answer. Patricia decided to just let things go and finally accepted the money from Mary, hiding it away so that Mary didn't know she wasn't spending a penny, using the one place that Mary never went, the bottom of the cleaning supplies cupboard, keeping the money in an empty paint tin in the back, covered by dirty rags. Not even the zombie apocalypse could make her sister put hands on anything like that. Shortly after moving in, Mary had screamed to high heaven over seeing a discolored cloth used to clean the furniture. When she had the stomach for it, every cent was going to charity. At least the cash could do good there, and she would keep notes so that when the police did come around, she could show them where the illicit funds went. That con artist couldn't stay out of trouble forever. Sooner or later, the law would catch up, hopefully before he skipped town. In the end, her sister was important, and Ronald was only trying to drive a wedge between them. No doubt to get Mary to leave with him to some far-off place so he could have full control of her. Mary opened up and told her about meeting up with Ronald, that he was staying at a friend's house now in the suburbs that had a hot tub, that her boyfriend was working as a freelance accountant and bookie for a few important people, swearing he was doing everything legit so he didn't get locked up again. Mary claimed this union was for Patricia too. Both of them had great relationships now with men of means to care for them. She told her that Ronald thought she was burning the money instead of spending it, but Mary told him off saying that was a lie. Patricia played it off, but knew Mary could never find out the truth. Ronald wasn't stupid, and knew well enough that she wouldn't spend that money on herself. That betrayal might just be enough to send Mary running off with that charlatan. Exactly like he wanted to happen. She'd played into his hands once, but had no intent on doing so a second time. All she had to do was wait for Ronald to make a mistake and go down in flames before he could drag Mary down with him into the muck where that trickster belonged. Patricia got a call from George requesting an impromptu date. He was leaving overseas the next day and wanted to see her, suggesting they meet at his penthouse. Back at work, she would have to take the night off. She hesitated, but he promised it would only be this once. Even her sister said she was crazy to even hesitate. With everyone egging her on, she decided to take 2 nights off. It felt strange doing it, and even her supervisor was shocked. Once it was done, however, it felt good taking time to be with her boyfriend. She wasn't the first person to do that in history. She decided to wear her own clothes this time. A blue pantsuit with a pink silk blouse and laced shoes. Mary groaned at the dress choice, but she ignored that. If George was going to beg her to go off the usual path, then Patricia was going to that on her terms. The independent streak in her was more powerful than ever. At the end of the day, these dates were something both she and George decided to do. Anything else would be done the same way, with the pair consenting and moving forward with acceptance and love. Plus, meeting George at his penthouse was a big deal. He tried to be blasé about it, but she wasn't stupid. He hadn't been to her place yet for good reason. Inviting a steady partner to your place was crossing a threshold no one could come back from. It was declaring they were a permanent fixture in your world. He clearly thought she was with this invite just before he was leaving. Mary had suggested he never needed to see her dumpy apartment, which had her tell off the one who had the nerve to say that while sleeping on the sofa bed. Patricia decided to take a taxi, and Mary walked her down. Unusual but much appreciated. She wanted them to stay close with Ronald in the picture. As long as their bond still had some pull, then perhaps he could try to make sure Mary didn't run off at random. After all, despite all the money Mary kept returning to her apartment, that had to mean there was still something good between them as sisters. What other reason would there be to stick around that small apartment when Ronald could put her up somewhere bigger? Deep down, Mary knew better. Upon reaching the hotel, she met with a pair of bodyguards at the entrance, slipping a scarf over her face when exiting the car to hide her identity somewhat. It was cold, so it didn't look that unusual. The men led her to the elevator, which took them where they needed to go. She was escorted to the right room and allowed to enter alone. A smile formed on her lips when she saw George in a shirt and Bermuda shorts with sandals. Suddenly, she seemed overdressed. Thank goodness you didn't wear one of the dresses. George hugged her. Sorry, I was dressed up at first, then a pipe burst and I dressed in something more comfortable. Then I just didn't want to change. These are my favorite shorts. He summarized and she laughed. He sounded like such an ordinary guy right now, happy to be out of his formal attire and just relaxing. It was interesting seeing him like this while standing in his fancy penthouse. How rude of me. Do you want a tour? I told the bodyguards to stay outside so we could have privacy. Patricia patted his arm. He was trying so hard to make her feel at home. I know what you're doing. George, I never agreed to date because you're rich. There's no need to try and hide that. When you come to my tiny apartment, I promise to leave it as is. I'm here for you, and I hope there's food because I was too nervous to eat dinner." That last part about not eating wasn't what she'd meant to let slip out, and she felt her face grow warm. "Great. I cooked something special for us. I thought sharing my culinary skills might be a good idea." George dragged her into the kitchen. "I made sushi, veal, and meatballs to commemorate our first meeting, and there are a few sides including potato salad and brown rice. So what do you think?" He looked like a kid waiting to get a good grade on their test. "You have raw fish and baby cows?" Patricia's voice raised several octaves. All attempts to act nice flew out the window. Outside the meatball and sides, she found the eating options outright appalling. She was never a fan of any animal being eaten raw or not well done. Worse, she would never eat veal that was made from cows as young as 5 to 6 months. "Fine, we can just stick with meatballs and the sides. Veal isn't that bad. I knew you wouldn't want to eat rabbit or swan," George said, and went to get their plates. He looked like the same kid who just got a fail because the teacher couldn't see through his art. Their different lifestyles becoming more apparent by the second. Not even their eating habits matched. "Swan? Oh my goodness, I don't know you at all." Patricia had heard of some of the elaborate eating habits of the rich, going after animals they considered more exotic. What was wrong with enjoying chicken or beef like normal people? No, they had to gulp down amazing things like caviar, which was just unhatched fish eggs. What was with them eating the baby versions of animals? Veal was more than terrible enough already. Swans are vicious. People only defend them because they look majestic. Just so you know, I was kidnapped by a swan when I was just 3 years old. My nanny enjoyed dressing me up in animal costumes, and one thought I was their baby and took off with me in their beak. The park staff had to call in animal control to get me back because that monster took me to its nest with other swans, George recalled. Patricia burst out laughing. She heard a few stories in the past about swans chasing people who wandered too close, but never of one actually making off with someone's child. It was awful, but also too amusing to hear. "I can never look at you the same, my swan man." "Yes, make fun of my traumatizing childhood," George mumbled, but a small smile formed. They ate meatballs with potato salad and wine. At first, it was somewhat somber because of their disagreement. Both soon started laughing over the swan story, agreeing to inform each other on their eating habits another time to avoid any more meal mishaps. After their meal, Patricia went to the bathroom to wash up. It was nice being with George in a casual setting, even if it was in a penthouse with a man who ate veal and swan. She pushed the thought that he also tore through innocent bunnies to the back of her mind. But there was still the real question of what she was doing here. George had opened a door inviting her to his penthouse. She had no doubt this was an impromptu decision he was too nervous for it not to be. Plus, his security probably fought tooth and nail about not being in the room. A part of her wondered if that meant they were under some other form of surveillance. Patricia re-entered the kitchen in time to catch George pigging out on sushi, clearly trying to rush in a few before she returned. The look of guilt on his face was too much. Imagine a grown man having to hide his eating habits from his date. Now she was the one feeling a bit bad about her behavior before. He should eat whatever he wanted. With a laugh, she walked up and kissed him on the nose. "I had a great time. We should do this more often." "Do you have to go? There are multiple rooms and I promise to be a gentleman." George looked desperate to not be alone. It had to be hard to be rich and lonely. A man like him could buy anything except a wife or girlfriend he loved to travel with. Patricia cared about him but wasn't ready for that level of commitment. Leaving her life behind to be with her billionaire might happen one day, but she was in no rush to do that just yet. The fear of rejection still hanging over this great moment like a ghost haunting her every step. "Is that why you wanted me at the penthouse before your trip, George? To be a gentleman?" Patricia smiled and leaned in close. She could barely take him seriously as he tried to swallow all that sushi. Plus, she had to focus on not wrinkling her nose over that fish smell. "No," George confessed, "but I didn't want to push you into it." The blush returning to his face was too cute. Most men would be fighting it off, but he tried to act like it wasn't happening. There was something beautiful and vulnerable about a man not acting macho all the time. He wanted her to feel happy and safe most of all, which was an added source of comfort. Patricia kissed him on both cheeks. There was no doubt he was the man meant to be in her life. The men in her past weren't like George, though they still needed time to ensure this was truly long-term. but her heart was ready to flutter from her chest into his hands. She wondered if giving in a little might not be such a bad idea. George was trustworthy enough to respect any restrictions she had if that was made possible. "How long will you be gone?" 2 months at least. "I wanted to tell you, but the change was last minute. I thought I had more time before an extended overseas trip." George sighed. There was no question he was disappointed by the sudden need to leave. Their time together was cut short for a separation that would last months. "I don't have a good excuse to delay, and using our relationship would only give the idea that a romance was a hindrance to my work. Can't play hooky on this one?" Patricia knew the answer before her question slipped out. He was part of a dynasty, a legacy. Acting like the fool was the perfect ingredient to losing business or getting disinherited. Either way, George would never put himself in that situation. "No, I have to be professional. I sometimes envy the rich, spoiled adults who just spend their time selling brands and hanging out on yachts." George popped in another sushi roll. "If I clean my teeth, will you kiss me goodnight?" He suddenly changed the direction of conversation. Proving her attempt to hide her discomfort over the smell hadn't worked like she hoped. A grin on his face showed that all was forgiven either way. "Go freshen up and find out," Patricia winked. She was feeling relaxed after such a fun evening, even with all the weird things that happened. Being at a place where George resided opened a new side of her. She wanted to see what else could happen tonight. George grinned and dashed to the bathroom. His gusto had her burst into a fit of giggles. They were truly acting like teenage lovers left in the house without their parents. Whatever happened next, she was ready to embrace it. They deserved to enjoy their time together before George left for his extended trip. Hopefully, when he returned, no drastic changes would have taken place.
Chapter 7. George sat on the plane pondering what might happen while he was gone. It was silly to think Patricia would ever step out on him. She wasn't that kind of person. Always kind and loyal to those she cared about, unless they turned on her or were getting hurt. He never intended to do anything to anger her. That didn't prevent mishaps, but accidents like the blindfold incident and the veal debacle weren't enough to turn his love away. So there was nothing he could see outside of a genuine betrayal to guarantee an end to their relationship, but that didn't stop him from worrying. This was still new after believing there would never be another soulmate. A thought that seemed silly now with Patricia in the picture. How many years had been wasted moping around instead of trying to move on? Then again, he might have settled for someone else before true love came along. There was no way of knowing how things might have been different if heartbreak hadn't turned him away from romance for so long. In the end, a mall security guard was the one he wanted in his life forever. Remembering their first official meeting at the luncheon was both beautiful and painful. He had been so awkward and accidentally creepy. The very fact that she didn't storm off or put him in a headlock proved fate had mercy on him. Patricia had been burned in the past and didn't need a weird rich guy making passes. But he wanted more and was willing to wait for her to be ready. It had been a fun and strange journey for both of them. From strained acquaintances to friends and then lovers, if not more. He'd wanted to find a woman to be with for life, and now that hope was within his grasp. Then reality had to slap him in the face. This trip was a big deal for his reputation and business. Partners needed reassurances he was on top of everything, that these charities weren't going to slow things down or mess with the bottom line. Money was the main thing for them, and plenty of it. The wealthy wanted more, not less. Their investments needed to be well maintained, and those working with them cutthroat. There were no princes and princesses where he was going. Everyone was hard and shrewd. Outsiders thought this was all fun and games, but the truth was very different. He couldn't wait to get this over with and come back to Patricia. They were just getting to a new level in their relationship when he up and flew away. If she didn't start considering an out, that would be lucky. She wasn't the person who dropped people at the drop of a hat, but she needed stability, and that meant a man who would be there. Her sister might tolerate a man who disappeared at all times as long as the money was there, but Patricia was not like that. Sooner or later something would have to give. He was scared of what changes were on the horizon. Funny, since he was a businessman trained to work with just that. The ebbs and flows that came with life in general, both at work and in his personal life. Patricia was different. The idea of losing her in any way was devastating. He could never come back whole from that. Losing one soulmate was soul-crushing. A second just might be the end of him. No way that one trip could end them, but he would always have a new one coming. We'll be lifting off in a few minutes. Cynthia joined him, buckling herself in. She tilted her head, staring at his lap.
The computer screen is blank. Unless you're daydreaming, I'm going to guess that this trip isn't on your wish list. Of course, with the 10 requests for rescheduling you sent through one of the other employees might have been a hint too. I might have an inside track as to why you're sulking instead of acting like an adult.
I'm not in the mood. George struck her down. Usually he would have tried to have a conversation, discuss the pros and cons of the situation. His publicist was a confidant paid well to take of the business and personal interests. But she was also his friend, one that would be gone after contracts were done. There was always the reality of that. Cynthia didn't stay in personal contact with former employers, something he could ignore in the past. But being with Patricia made him yearn more for authenticity, instead paid courtesy. Cynthia was always going to be business first, and he didn't need reminding of that hard fact. Cynthia laughed out loud. An unexpected move after a straight rebuff. The sound was refreshing, though, after being in the doldrums all the way to the airport, which had been a quiet affair with the publicist going over their itinerary and him mostly nodding. She hadn't questioned his attitude then, probably assessing things in her own way before making any snap judgments, which made her both perfect at the job and impossible to hide from. She was the best at what needed to be done, keeping both him and the business afloat. That night with Patricia had been the best of his life. Nothing compared to her staying over at his penthouse. He feared that she might get turned off thinking that he was too forward. Instead, they had an awkward meal, then great conversation. The Swan confession was over the top in retrospect, but he never expected that she would be so against veal. It was still from a cow. Either way, the rest of the night went well, and there was no doubt she was glad they'd gotten the chance to be together all night. He had no complaints about the matter. The morning after, when she had to leave, was hard. Neither wanted to go, and she brought up again the chance of playing hooky. It both warmed and broke his heart that she wanted to be with him that much. But the answer had to be no, and they both knew it. They were working people at the end of the day. Him a billionaire with a business to run, and her a mall security and activist for a great community. Their purpose might not align, but neither wanted to let down those who depended on them. That wasn't who they were at the end of the day. This lady must be the one, to be able to bring your business obsession grinding to a halt. Cynthia faced him with a smirk. I knew there was someone out there for the great George Kent. You thought I was wrong, but look where we are. Flying in luxury, and you just want to go coach with the woman of your dreams. If I wasn't working, I would bring out the tissues. She relaxed as the plane started takeoff, the look on her face making it clear the conversation was not ending anytime soon. Silence wasn't going to protect him. If I say this is neither the time nor place, it won't stop you, will it? George sighed, giving her his full attention. Sometimes he wished she didn't care about him outside of a spreadsheet and schedule. But her personal touch was what made her so valuable, along with all the other skills. He never really wanted her to change. I've been doing my job for decades. The stewardess on this plane won't report anything new. Every outlet keeps trying to guess how many secret lovers and babies you have. Unless there's a family hiding in the Caymans, I'm pretty sure we're safe to talk. His publicist wasn't one to hold back, and from the gasps of everyone else but his bodyguards, everyone else was aghast. But in truth, this was Cynthia when she was being nice. Mean was worse. I won't risk the business. There needs to be a balance. George had no idea what that might be. He'd done everything to make time to be with Patricia, make her feel important and provided for without being too clingy. Yet he felt as if enough wasn't being done at all. You already did, and I approved it. Any tweaks needed were done by me and your top-notch team. There's nothing else you can do or change without messing with your business. If she can't handle it, then the relationship isn't meant to be. I believe it is, but that's life. Cynthia sighed. I'm not sure that I can accept that. After turning away from that arranged thing, how can I lose out now? George looked Cynthia in the eye. She was the woman with all the answers, but this seemed impossible to know. Cynthia reached across and took his hand. We will cross that bridge if that happens. Patricia sat in the middle of her bedroom. The first thing she did upon returning was take a nap. Being on cloud 9 and disappointed at the same time was complicated. It seemed ungracious to be mad that her billionaire boyfriend had to travel for business. She knew he would have to go away at some point. Working with multiple businesses across the globe meant flying out of the country for all kinds of functions and meetings. Yet she'd gotten used to having access to him. Sure, they were apart for a bit, but 2 months so early in their relationship was a lot. He would call, of course, but that wasn't the same as face-to-face. Their night together had been magical. After staying away from men for years, she never thought such a thing was going to happen. But George changed her mind. No matter what was next, she knew he would do his best to keep her happy. A man who didn't put himself before everyone else was the perfect person to enter her life. That night at the penthouse was seared into memory in the best way. He was right to pick that as their date spot. Now she was alone, having risen from her nap to start cleaning the apartment, determined to make it perfect for when he returned. Good thing Mary wasn't there to ask if she'd lost her mind. Working hard to turn this small space into something new, the kitchen was first made spotless, then the living room along with the sofa bed. She entered her own room and started reorganizing everything in sight, saving the bathroom for last. But halfway through, something stopped her. The realization that this wasn't about George. She was doing this because there was nothing that could be done. He was gone for 2 months and she couldn't make him stay. Their love had blossomed to the point she wanted to be around him all the time, which was why he could take a big step in inviting her to his penthouse, where they started with that crazy dinner. Learning he ate veal and swan were the biggest shockers. But men in her past had done way worse than have weird eating habits. George had become a new constant in her life. Sure, he was a billionaire with businesses to run, but she was special to him from the get-go. The soulmate he never thought existed. She needed convincing, and the memory of almost rejecting him made her heart ache. Imagine throwing all of this away because of a hard past. Romance had re-entered her life, turning everything into something new. After years of protecting her heart from those who would break it again, she was now with a man who only wanted to bring her joy and happiness. For her, that was huge. Men had become dangerous creatures to keep at arm's length. Sure, there were those trusted enough to be friends, but dating and romance had been off the table, both to avoid drama and heartache. Why put yourself through predictable strife? The idea of yet another person using romance as a poison to hurt her was too much. There was so much out there other than another bad relationship. Focusing on activism and friendship helped rebuild her self-esteem and worth. It was not easy putting yourself back together, especially when those around you didn't understand anything was wrong. Like her sister, Mary had been both right and wrong in the end. Correct about love still being out there for her. George was the man who would take care of her forever, as long as nothing came between them. Though it seemed short of a plane crash, he was determined to be there. Wrong in that Patricia had to keep dating around and digging through trash for a good man. He came anyway without her having to break herself into pieces just for a second chance. That was something the hardened woman refused to do, and it was the right choice in the end. Now she had to accept that life had changed. Yes, it was obvious, but a part of her was still operating in the past, like trying to keep things perfect and using work to cover up pain. She missed George, but instead of accepting that, was trying to wash it all away. If the apartment was spotless, her mind somehow put that with him being closer to returning. But that wasn't reality. He was going to be away for 2 months on business. One day it might be 3 or 6 months. What would she do then? This was a wake-up call to the life she was entering. Patricia started to cry. She was trying to keep both this new life and her old one, refusing to budge on the reality that something had to give. George was moving heaven and earth to keep her happy. What had she given up to do the same? Taking a chance on him was no longer enough. Now it was her turn to consider what needed to be sacrificed in order for them to be with each other. She loved her community, friends, and this tiny home. But George wasn't going to give up his entire life to move in with her. That would be ludicrous. The truth was staring her in the face. If she loved him, then the next step was pulling away from this life. When their relationship became public, she would also need bodyguards eventually, as the paparazzi and those who targeted George turned their sights on Patricia. Staying in this city was going to be impossible. Being with him meant giving up the life she'd come to love. But if he was the man of her dreams, what other choice was there? Mary walked in with Ronald as if it were vogue, not giving the other woman time to shout before sitting him on the sofa. Both looked flushed and excited, dressed in what anyone could tell were expensive threads.
Now don't get mad. I had to bring him over. At least he's here in front of you instead of me going behind your back. Patricia, I wanted to tell you face to face. I have the best news in the world, and I need you to be my sister who is happy for me.
Patricia's chest tightened. If this was what she was thinking, then the chickens had come home to roost. Mary had become more excited of late, getting closer to that con artist despite her best efforts. She'd stayed close in hopes of being there when the relationship went sideways. Instead, it seemed that logic was being thrown out with the bathwater. Ronald wasn't exiting their lives anytime soon, and that wasn't a good thing. Then out with it. Good afternoon to you both. I was doing some cleaning and decided to take a break. Mary tutted and kissed Ronald on the cheek. My sister is such a workaholic. Even after being on a huge date last night, she still finds chores to do instead of relax. Patricia froze watching the scene unfold. After keeping her relationship a secret from everyone but Mary, there was no way that this lovesick fool had told a criminal everything. It took everything in her not to explode and throw them both out. She'd been wrong to try and protect someone who wasn't willing to face the truth. So he knows about who I'm dating? That's quite the surprise since I haven't taken the news public as of yet. Mary's face went several shades pale. Being sisters, there were things you couldn't hide. Despite Patricia's calm demeanor, the younger sister knew that she was furious. This secret had been kept for months, and no permission had been given to share it with anyone. That slipped my mind. Ronald's like family. It felt wrong keeping such happy news to ourselves. He won't tell a soul. It might surprise you, but his life's all about keeping things under wraps. The pleading look in her eyes was a cry for help and forgiveness for moving out of turn. If I may speak, Ronald interjected. I think it's great that you found someone, Patricia. It seemed that romance was out of your life, but then a white man rode in. Ironic, a woman of the people fell for a man from outside our social strata. But you were always one to see opportunity, even if it was to share with this lovely community instead of keeping it to yourself. No matter what happens, I wish you happiness with this new boyfriend. Patricia knew this was a move to distract her. Give Mary the time to come up with an exit strategy. She was in no mood to give out mercy. Thank you, Ronald, but I would sooner baptize a shelter full of cats than pretend to tolerate you a second longer. Tell me what news that needs to be said, then both of you get out of my house. She spat with venom. I told you she was never happy about us. Men like me know when a woman's being sneaky. Learned long ago to stay ahead of those who wish me and those I love harm, Ronald said. His eyes danced with the victory of being right all along. She wanted to tear him apart. Ronald and I are engaged. I wanted to invite you on a trip to help me pick out a ring, but I guess that's not going to happen. Mary sniffled, looking away. Even now, she was trying to pull a guilt trip, after spilling secrets that weren't hers and bringing a con man into their home. Disappointment quickly turned to raging anger. Enough was enough. I'm not going to waste my time explaining how much of a mistake this is. Ronald left you high and dry. I helped you pick up the pieces, and I'm repaid with the return of this loser? I've had enough. If you want to ruin your life, I'm not going to stop you. Patricia snorted. That's a terrible thing to say. I always encouraged you to find love, that romance was still in your future. You just wanted me to stay and be lonely. Well, sorry, sister, but we both found the man of our dreams, and there's no crime in that. Mary spat back with fire in her own eyes. Then I guess there's nothing left to say. You have 3 months to leave here permanently, Mary. I'm certain Ronald can take care of you. Patricia folded her hands. If Mary wanted to throw her life away, it was time to let her sister do that. But she wasn't going to stand by and watch a naive girl throw her life away. Mary could do that somewhere else. You're kicking me out? But we're sisters. Mary tried to walk towards her. No, we're roommates. I put up with your crap because of sisterhood. I was wrong to do that, and now I'm done. You not only took back a criminal, but shared my personal business with him. I'm not waiting to see what happens next. I'm done. Patricia rose to her feet. Then I guess we take our leave. Just one question. Has George proposed? Ronald asked. I never thought you would be the one to have a sugar daddy, but life's full of surprises. If you don't get out, I'll make sure this one's your last, Patricia hissed. Come on, Ronald. Patricia needs time to cool off. I'm sorry if I stepped on any toes. Goodbye, Patricia. Mary walked out, crying as Ronald comforted her. Patricia slammed the door behind them. Both of them were tricksters and meant to be together.
Chapter 8. It was nearly 3 months since George had left for his trip, which got extended when issues with a factory made him have to stay longer. They kept in touch via both phone and online chats. He preferred texting over calling, but relented since Patricia was terrible at reading them, not able to translate his shorthand text speak. Both were excited for what was going to happen upon his return. Time away was becoming less of a burden. They couldn't wait to have a reunion dinner and plan out the next course of action. Patricia focused more than ever on her activism. Helping others was a calling she always answered, knowing one day she might not be around as much. Deciding that moving away didn't mean an end to helping her community. George had come in as an outsider to help. If that was possible, then she had nothing to worry about. Helping from a distance would be different, but that was better than just disappearing one day. Knowing this helped ease her fears of taking the next step with George. He wanted to help others like she did. The mall was already reopened and looking better than ever. The renovations really emphasized what made the place special, a beautiful atmosphere to shop and hang out safely. There was added security for a year from a private company. Everyone had been put through special drills in case of a terrorist attack. All mall security took short courses in new tactics to help better protect themselves and others. It was all great additions to what was already in place. George had come through in making their community better without bragging. A few complained about the extra work, but it was all for the best at the end of the day. She was happy to be with someone who was helping to make things better for those around her. People spoke well of George, that he was one of the good ones. Not the typical rich bigwig who didn't care about the common man. It was nice to have those with means use it to help those with less. Poverty shouldn't be the only reason to offer a helping hand. Taking care of the working and lower middle class helped lessen the chances of more becoming poor. It was hard to stay afloat alone. Any help was welcome to stay out of the red zone. Work was a great distraction in not thinking about George still being abroad. She got to remember him in the ways that reminded her this trip was worth it. Seeing all the good his money had done brought the truth home. He needed to stay rich in order to help others like this. The mall was able to add a few stores and more people were getting employed, all because a white man in a limo decided that their community deserves a little sprucing up. She felt ashamed about her initial skepticism, but understood that was a way of survival. "Patricia, I need you to keep an eye on the young man in the red beanie and green jacket by the new pizza joint. He looks to be up to no good, but I'm stuck watching his friend in a baby doll dress and large bag by the baby store." A fellow security spoke over the walkie-talkie. She sighed. Every few months, they had a pregnant couple looking to rob the place. It was sad to see young people turning to crime because they were out of options. Perhaps their parents had kicked them out, or they felt they didn't have enough for the baby. Either way, it was a blatant failure of society why they felt this was their best option in solving things. "I'm on it. Be kind to the girl. Unless she's armed, proceed with caution. We don't need news about a pregnant girl miscarrying in the mall because we were too rough," she responded. The male security on the other side was a take-no-nonsense kind of guy. So was she, but he had a particular intolerance for the plight of young people. Seeing them all as lazy and stupid, Patricia walked over to the pizza joint but stayed in the crowd. She'd eaten there twice and the food was amazing. It cost more than the other fast food places, but that meant those who had more money had a place to shop locally. If they were going to invade their community, the least they could do was spend all that extra cash in-house. Most of the customers were white, with the air of being too good for a regular mall. But as long as they spent cash and then were on their way, it was tolerable having them around for a while. Patricia caught sight of the young man she was supposed to monitor. Her heart fell when she recognized him. Timothy Cornwell, a high school dropout who was weeks away from getting his GED. Why he got himself caught up in such a situation was beyond reason. This boy was on his way up, with a scholarship lined up from his sponsor to a black college once he graduated. It drove her crazy how teens found a way to mess up a good thing. All adults could do was point them on the right path and be there. No one could make their choices for them. Then she noticed out of the corner of her eye a troubling sight. One of the temporary high-security men that George hired was heading for the teen. She'd seen enough news reports to know when people were looking to start something. This neighborhood wasn't infested by gangs and crime, but outsiders like to assume, and multiple black teens got in the crosshairs as a result. If she didn't get Timothy away from here, he might be a statistic. Taking a shortcut, she dragged the teen out of sight moments before the man made a fateful turn. "I didn't do anything." Timothy immediately started struggling. Typical behavior for those caught in a crime. Denial while trying to away. The innocent usually tried to cooperate, limiting their words to a respectful greeting and asking if there were any issues. "Other than almost getting yourself killed. Stop struggling, it's me, Miss P." Timothy looked up with wide eyes. "What's going on? I was just walking. Why are people bugging?" He looked like any boy who was told at a young age to watch out for anyone in authority, always fearful of being picked up or profiled. Walking to rob the new pizza place? I can't believe that you would be so dumb. In the middle of high traffic? All the security are watching like hawks, and that new team was almost on you like mosquitoes. Patricia explained to him with a hard glare. Miss P, I wasn't going to rob anywhere. I just wanted to get an application to work part-time at one of the stores. Ramona said the pizza joint was hiring and she was going to check up on some baby clothes upstairs. Timothy looked ready to cry. I'm not a criminal, I swear. Okay, just stay next to me so you're not picked up. Patricia took him out front. She soon got an update on her walkie. Turned out Ramona was trying to swipe baby clothes and got caught. Timothy wanted to go back, but she ordered him to head home and wait for an update. His girlfriend got herself in trouble, but he didn't need to do down with her. At the end of the day, everyone had choices. Timothy chose to stay on the straight and narrow. This Ramona chose to become a thief while pregnant. The owners of that store didn't tolerate theft. No matter the excuse, they were going to press charges on the foolish girl. Patricia went back to her post. Soon she saw a young lady with a small belly being led out front. What surprised her most was this girl was a white blonde girl in a school uniform. Looked like she could afford the baby clothes. Perhaps the wanted to be independent, or had no sense. Either way, it looked like Timothy was going to be more trouble than she thought. A sudden pain her side had Patricia head towards the nearest bench. It had been years since she had cramps this bad. Her periods came at random and only a few times a year. Perhaps this was one of the bad ones. But when another wave of pain came, that was worse. She knew that something was horribly wrong. Using all the strength she could muster, she called a fellow security to come check up on her, then requested another to call an ambulance. If she died trying to save a stupid boy's life, she was going to haunt that kid for the rest of eternity. Patricia lay in the hospital feeling groggy. Everything had gone by so fast. One moment she was working, and the next being rushed into an ambulance. The pain had gotten to the point where she was given strong drugs to counteract it. They asked her a bunch of questions in between that were impossible to remember now. It was all a hazy nightmare she wanted to forget. Whatever caused this had to be serious and a source of concern. Leave it to her bad luck to be hit with some kind of illness after finding George and considering a life together. Not knowing was the worst part. She'd lived a healthy life and had regular checkups. There was nothing coming to mind as the source of this new predicament. Could it have been stress? With recent events of her sister becoming engaged to a notorious con man and staying busy with work plus activism, it was tempting to nail that as the source. But that didn't feel like the heart of the matter. Miss Williams, you're awake. A nurse peeked in the room. The woman was blonde and stout with a warm smile. The doctor will be with you soon. That was quite a scare yesterday. Let's hope that there won't be more anytime soon. I can't imagine how scary it was in your condition. The nurse left without further explanation. What did she mean by condition? Worst-case scenarios raced through her head. Could there be a terminal illness looming on the horizon? A diagnosis that made it impossible for her to carry on life as she knew it? The thought of becoming a burden to her loved ones was terrifying. Those who cared would be there, but she never wanted to be dependent on others at that level. Used to independence, such a life would be soul-crushing. Plus, what would George say to returning to such terrible news? If there was anything to break a budding romance, it was a bad medical diagnosis. Patricia, I see that you're awake. The drugs will still be working through your system. We have to be careful since no one realized the state you were in at admittance, a doctor said as he walked in. He had chocolate skin and stern eyes. I'm Dr. Wharton, and hopefully we can have a short talk about what happened. According to your colleagues, you called for emergency assistance after having sudden pain in your midsection. Did you injure yourself in any way recently? Any strenuous activity that might have aggravated anything? No, everything was business as usual. Patricia turned to face the doctor. She'd tried to sit up, but her head swooned. The sooner she was well enough to go home, the better. Plus, she was struggling not to blush when that night with George came to mind. No way was her body that out of practice. Not that it was anyone's business. I want you to give it to me straight, doctor. I'm not a shrinking violet, so don't hold back a terrible diagnosis. Does this pain mean I'm dying or have some sort of debilitating illness? Just tell me the truth. The doctor looked shocked at the suggestion. He placed down his clipboard and took her hand. His eyes became kind as he stroked it. You're not ill. I promise there's no awful source to this pain. In fact, I think this might be a source for celebration. There were a few rumors about our resident activist getting back out there. I guess they were true. The nurse giggled as if keeping some kind of secret. It was grating having these medical professionals acting as if they were on the set of a reality show. No one was waiting for the news besides herself. There was no reason to delay what was going on and get it over with. "Patricia, you're pregnant," Dr. Wharton revealed. "I have your medical history and know that miscarriages have been an unfortunate experience in the past. The pains were from strain. Your uterus, as you know, takes more strain when going through a pregnancy. 5 times for the average woman, 8 when working as you do currently. Congratulations. I hope recovery for both you and the child goes smoothly." Aside from the sudden hospitalization, Patricia was dumbfounded. What the doctor said didn't compute. She was pregnant? No, that wasn't possible. All precautions were taken. Had something burst? Did they do more than what was supposed to happen? She doubted this was a random act of God. No one in their right mind would try to make her a modern-day Virgin Mary. "I had no idea. We realized after running tests. If you knew, that would be the first thing to mention to the ambulance crew. Having a child can be both terrifying and exciting. Know that we're here to help ease along the process medically, personally too if need be." The nurse smiled. Dr. Wharton grasped her hand. "I won't lie to you. This will be risky due to your medical history. So I'm going to ask, but you can answer later. Do you want to carry the pregnancy to term?" The question hung in the air. Her body might not be able to go through with this. Worse, she knew that doing this was going to be a risk to her life. After the last miscarriage, she was advised to consider adoption over making another attempt at getting pregnant. The memory of how the adoption process treated her was a bitter one she tried to avoid. "I want to keep the baby. If things go sideways, I'll be here immediately to see what can be done," Patricia decided. At the end of the day, she wanted this baby more than anything, even George. A child was her dream, and this was a chance to make that come true. "Great. Then we'll be taking every precaution, including immediate leave from work. No buts. If it were possible, you would be kept here for the entirety of this pregnancy," Dr. Wharton said. "I don't want to see anything bad happen to you, Patricia. The community needs you." Patricia blinked back tears. She was touched by what he said. This place was a caring city, and she loved living there every day. Even the bad ones, which didn't compare to time with her ex-husbands. "Thank you. I want this go well, too. If work needs to take a back seat, so be it. I'm determined to carry it to term. I truly think this is my only chance at a baby. After all these years, she was pregnant again. All the hoping and wishing had finally paid off. Hitting the pavement for adoption had failed, making her think this was never going to happen. It was so unexpected. By now, she'd given up on having a child. The next thing she wanted was to know the gender. But that probably should wait until George returned from his trip. "Your sister's here. We haven't told her anything, but if you want, she can be brought in," the nurse added. "Congrats on the baby, Patricia. I can see the happiness radiating off you. Thank you both. Please send in Mary." Patricia was finally able to lift her head a bit. Hopefully these drugs didn't have any adverse effects on the baby. She couldn't imagine how panicked those closer to her were over this. Guilt radiated off her. A happy time was also complicated. The pregnancy carried risks, and no one was out of the woods yet. Mary walked in, looking perfectly primped and ice-faced. No one would have guessed her sister had been through a medical emergency. Instead of sitting, she stood at the edge of the bed, surveying Patricia as if looking at a piece of faulty equipment. "I guess you escaped the worst of it unscathed. So what did the doctors say is wrong with you? I'm surprised after what happened recently that I was still your next of kin. Thought we were over as sisters," as Patricia sighed, telling herself to not get mad while in a weakened state. She couldn't believe that Mary was here to complain instead of being supportive. Next of kin had 3 names on the list, and it was surprising that they weren't present. Instead, standing over her was a sister too self-absorbed to process how serious things were right now. "I'm surprised the others aren't here." "Thank you for coming, Mary, and I hope things work out between us one day. I have surprising news that neither of us expected. This situation is a blessing in disguise." "Well, you better reveal the good stuff fast. I sent away the welcome party. The doctors said you needed rest." Decided it was best to keep you away from noise and useless people. I called our family in case there needed to be funeral arrangements. But you're still here, Mary said without showing much emotion. It was like talking to a wall. What was wrong with her? Right. Do you know if George tried to call? Patricia decided not to get in a confrontation. I think he'll really be excited about what's developed. I turned your cell off to focus on more important things. Now tell me what has you so excited. This is a hospital, not a ballroom. Mary finally sat and crossed her legs. Patricia considered not saying anything. Mary was being strange, and that was worrisome. But she was still family, and it wasn't as if her sister was dangerous. So she pushed past her instincts. I'm pregnant. Don't ask me how. I was shocked about it too. George pregnant or Virgin Mary pregnant? Mary actually started to have emotion on her face, but it was something between disgust and shock. If this wasn't her sister, Patricia would have ended the conversation a long time ago. The first one, I just didn't expect this to happen now after all the miscarriages and lost opportunities. I hope George will be just as happy as I am. Patricia rubbed her belly. There was hardly any change. Now that she had to rest, a belly might actually start to show soon. The idea of being visibly pregnant excited her. That would mean being one step closer to having a child. Blinking back tears, she thought about what their future would be like. A boy would be nice to have. No question he would be cute with both her and George's features. It might seem selfish, but she wanted the child to look like her as much as possible. She'd seen how some people behaved when a black mother carried around a fair-skinned child. The behavior ranged from surprise to outright rude, including those assuming the mother was a nanny, even while breastfeeding. But a white woman with a dark-skinned child was treated as if she committed the best act on earth, whether the child was hers or not. A girl would be spoiled rotten by both of them. She wanted little Angel to grow up smart, kind, and independent. An image of a baby girl reaching out to her almost had Patricia in tears. Congrats on the baby. I know this has been something you wanted for a long time. Mary finally smiled. It was nice seeing her sister acting like a normal person. Also, Ronald got me an engagement ring. She held out her hand to show off a sapphire ring that shone on a silver band. Patricia decided to not comment on how Mary co-opted her moment. That's great. I'm certain Ronald will take care of all your needs. I can't wait for George to return. Mary patted Patricia's arm. That goes for the both of us.
Chapter 9. George was happy to finally be ready to head home tonight. It was daytime already in America, but he would reach home in the evening. He was glad to have had a great trip. The investors were happy and everything was in great shape. There was no doubt that he could handle a new relationship and still be a billionaire businessman. As much as he loved Patricia, this was the life he was meant to live. He was never going to be the guy who left everything behind to become a baker or accountant to live with Patricia in her matchbook apartment. Life had thrown him the perfect curveball by bringing his new soulmate at age 40. At first it seemed like horrible oversight. At the busiest time of life, with the decision of an arranged marriage looming. Why would fate bring Patricia in his life then? Now he understood why. To keep him from choosing an empty life of convenience over one of true love and happiness. Plus, he was older and wiser with a ready-made life for a family. He wasn't exactly unable to in the past, but now was an even better time than in the past. It also gave him time to get over the loss of his past love. Yes, he still missed her, but in his 20s and early 30s, no woman could have handled that stage of mourning. If there was a soulmate during that time, he would have missed her 1,000,000 times. That loss had changed so much, and his parents feared he might not survive it. With Patricia in his life, it felt like he lived for them to meet one day. That sounded unrealistic, but then again, there were so many things about their meeting that sounded like something out of a romance novel. Though in that case, he would probably have been more of a wealthy, early 30s bad boy, and Patricia a mid-20s young woman coming to work at his father's firm. A naive young lady looking for love in all the wrong places, only to meet the baddest boy who had the key to her heart, and so much more. The thought made him laugh out loud. Romance novels could have the funniest concepts for a story, but they were made as fantasies for their readers. An escape from reality that could be harder than anything fiction could cook up. He hadn't been able to get a hold of Patricia recently. At first he thought there might be issues with reception. That could happen when calling from abroad. He also tried Mary and only got voicemail. Seeking advice from Cynthia, she told him to wait.
that trying too hard might look like stalking or desperation. Also that leaving 3 or 4 voice messages were too many. He thought that was restraint, but accepted the suggestions. The last thing he needed was for his girlfriend to see him as some kind weirdo calling her up repeatedly. Instead, he focused on what was going to happen once back in the States. Being away had really opened his eyes to what was missing in his life. Business would always be a part of him. It was in his blood to do what he did for a living. Many assumed that wealthy people just sat on their money, but it was hard work to stay in the top percentile. Sure, those of lower class worked hard for less. He never wanted to lose all his riches to toil like that. Over time, he learned to be grateful to be part of a family that was steeped in generations of wealth. Before Patricia, it was much less burdensome to travel solo. There was no one to come home to, so why not be a traveling billionaire? No downside existed. Work and the fun of luxury were his only companions. He always kept his group of friends small. After losing his first love, he wasn't a great person to hang out with for a long time. He'd lost most of his more outgoing friends and never was the same. But he came around and adapted to the person who existed now. Better to be changed but alive instead of the same and in the grave. Returning meant facing the fact that there needed to be a talk about the future. Up until this point, he and Patricia were living in the now, getting to know each other and moving forward in small doses, aside from the night in the penthouse where they took a huge leap. One he hoped she wouldn't come to regret. After her hard past, he wanted to keep things from getting too complicated. But their romance reminded him that love can be messy. They just had to learn how to navigate that and stay together. He'd come too far to lose her now. Personally, he was excited to see Patricia soon. Nervous too, but that was expected. Their lives had changed by a chance meeting and deciding to take the leap. One day he would be prepared to take another big step forward. An engagement was in the cards, but he had to find the right time. What he knew for sure was not to serve anything too exotic at the reception. He doubted she was going to be a fan of blowfish. The furthest he was willing to go was caviar. Hopefully that would be less horrifying than veal or rabbit. At the end of the day, he hoped that they would be in it for the long haul. It seemed a waste if they fell to the wayside. He was determined not to let that happen. Patricia was willing to give her all, and so was he. Both deserved happiness, and sometimes you had to fight for it. Besides, if this tanked, he would just remain a lifelong bachelor. After experiencing love like this, there was no way he could bear going into an arranged marriage. Cynthia walked in, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Holding out a cell, he took it with a wary look on his face. That was never a look on her face before, and it was a mixture of glee and terrifying. "I thought you were taking things slow, but I guess my boss is a sly dog." He had no idea what was going on. Did they enter a new venture or find unexpected profits? Whatever it was, he hoped it was worth seeing Cynthia acting so out of character. "Good afternoon, this is George Kent on the line." "Wow, is that how you sound during business?" Patricia responded on the other line. George nearly jumped 10 feet into the air. The last thing he'd planned was for Patricia to call back. Silly in retrospect, since he left messages on both her and Mary's phones. Now he understood why Cynthia thought that was overkill. If she was calling because of his over-worrying, that would be embarrassing. "Hi, I was trying to reach you earlier. Yes, there's my work voice and my casual one. So, how have you been feeling since we last spoke?" "I'm fine, and yes, those messages were a bit much. But I know you care, and that means a lot," Patricia said. "George, I have some news that can't wait. I told Cynthia first to get a gauge on your reaction. Sorry, but I was kind of nervous. She loves the second part, but thinks the first half will be hard for you to handle. I want to start off by saying that I'm fine. The hospital has taken great care of me, and I'm going home tomorrow after some rest and extra tests." George clutched the phone for dear life. His mind went back to the love he lost. Was there something wrong with Patricia? He couldn't bear losing another lover. It would be better if Patricia dumped or cheated on him. The words wouldn't come out as his throat started to close up. It had been years since he had a panic attack, but knew the signs. Moving slowly, he sat down with Cynthia watching over him. There had to be good news in this call somewhere. Why else would his publicist be so excited to hand him the phone? "George, breathe. She's fine, just stay calm. I knew this might set you back," Cynthia fussed, trying to catch his attention, prepared to help her boss. "Good. Now look at me and breath deeply. Let go of all your troubles and build new paths for those you can't ignore or forget." She took the phone from him as he obeyed. "Listen, Patricia, just hold for a bit.
George needs a moment to center himself. He'll be back on the line with you in a bit, I promise.
George, is he okay?
Patricia called out over the line. The ragged breathing and high-pitched voice betrayed her fear. Cynthia talked him through it, going over breathing exercises and saying soothing words of encouragement. More than ever, he was grateful to have her. The bodyguards came closer, but they couldn't do what she could. He always saw her as a maverick, but this woman was also a saint and his saving grace. Any moment he thought of firing her was a giant mistake never to be considered again. The idea of panicking alone nearly gave him another attack. Are you ready to talk to Patricia? I told her to hold, but I don't think she's taking it well. George cleared his throat and took his cell, feeling awful that Patricia was already at the hospital and he'd just made her feel worse. Patricia, darling, I'm fine. Sorry about that. Don't treat me like an idiot, George. Me being hospitalized clearly upset you. Just let me know that you're really okay. I couldn't take it if Cynthia has to come to my apartment just to tell me something bad has happened. Patricia's voice started to break. No, George said. I swear that I'm okay. Yes, I had a panic attack, but Cynthia knows how to help me, and if it was that bad, a doctor is on call. It's fine. I just want to know why you're hospitalized. This situation couldn't get any worse. He upset his girlfriend, who was laid up in the hospital. Talk about great boyfriend material. I'm pregnant, Patricia revealed. Guess I should just let the cat out of the bag. I had some pain at work and had to be taken away by ambulance. You know about my miscarriages? Well, I need to be extra careful as being pregnant stresses my body nearly 10 times the average woman. At least that's what the doctor said. I was still groggy at the time. Pregnant? With a baby? But how? George was in shock. Of all the things he expected to hear, this was not it. Penthouse, remember? Please don't ask me if it's yours, Patricia said. I would never do that, George swore. I'm so surprised. Congratulations. Patricia burst out laughing. Thank you, George. So I guess you're okay with this. Okay? I'm ecstatic. We're having a baby. I can't wait to get back. I'll be there tomorrow evening and I'm heading straight for the apartment, George declared. I'll be waiting with bells on. I won't have much to do since I can't work until after the baby's born. Patricia's voice sounded sad. He knew she enjoyed being busy and helping others. I'm certain there are ways to do little things until the baby comes, George said. Does Mary know? She can stay with you. Mary and I had a bit of a falling out. Her ex-con boyfriend is back in her life. Worse, they're engaged and she's giving me the cold shoulder because I gave her notice to leave. Well, if he's dangerous, that was the right thing to do. I'm sorry, George sighed. Right, anyway, the nurse passed by signaling for me to hang up. Need that beauty rest. Okay, goodbye and see you soon. George ended the call. The room broke out in applause and congratulations all around. Patricia decided to take a taxi home. Mary had promised to come for pickup, but she wasn't comfortable with that. Something was off with her sister, and she didn't like it. As if the woman was dissociating for some reason. Perhaps because of their argument, but it felt deeper than that. Whatever it was, she didn't need that drama while pregnant. She also didn't want Ronald sniffing around. He was the worst sort of weasel and criminal. No matter what Mary claimed, that was man dangerous. She'd heard stories of people talking out against him getting severely injured or worse. Most were thought to be accidents, which scared her even more. Being prepared for a gunfight was one thing, but for someone who had people ready to harm you and make it look benign, that was another thing altogether. She wanted to live a long life, and that was best far from that tricky monster. It was sad to lose yet another family member to drama and bad decisions, but she knew deep down, and Mary would never be the sister she could rely on long term. She was always there, but that solidarity was rarely returned. Now there was an end date, making her both sad and relieved. At the end of the day, she needed to what was best for her, and now a baby. George was in her life now, and that was a great weight off her shoulders. Plus, she had a supportive community at her side, though Mary had done something to keep them away. She'd called up friends only to get either surprised that she wanted to talk them or sent to voicemail. Since she knew when best to call them, the latter was likely on purpose. At another time, Patricia would confront Mary about this passive-aggressive move. Acting out against her was one thing, but dragging in her friends was just low. This was an act of spite that made her more determined to move on without the young sourpuss. If that girl wanted to end their sisterhood on a bad note, that was her choice. She had better things to do. Dr. Wharton and the hospital staff had been amazing. She felt like a princess during her time there. They ensured all her needs were met and kept the guard well rested. Even when it went against her personal wishes, She wanted to stay on the phone with George forever. But her vitals had gone haywire, and it took everything to keep staff out of the room as agreed. She'd heard whispers of a few wondering if the boyfriend was a secret agent or criminal. The latter was annoying to hear because that stereotype was so old and stupid. She used the time in the taxi to make some calls, including to her job to check in if things were okay. The supervisor made it clear that Patricia had nothing to worry about. They were glad that she was okay and not in worse condition. Upon revealing her pregnancy, there was squealing and lots of congratulations, tempered by a bit of teasing about the secret lover people were theorizing about. There was no way to deny or ignore it now. But at least the call was short, and in the end she knew everyone meant well, wanting the best for her. It was nice to be heading home. She wanted to be in her own bed and prepare a meal in her own kitchen. Being taken care of was nice, but her independent streak couldn't tolerate that for long. Working hard and community activism was deeply ingrained. After all the losses in her past, these were things she could control and keep close. Once bed rest time came, she wasn't sure how to survive. That was months away, though, and not something she had to think about. The taxi had to stop a block away due to heavy traffic. She paid and walked the rest of the way. Stretching her legs out in the open felt great. Walking among people on the street like it was an ordinary day, even with all the amazing and strange things that had transpired. This was actually nice, to relax and be normal, not the woman carrying a risky pregnancy, or dating a white billionaire who was away on a business trip. She was just a mall security guard about to take leave from work. Soon she would be in her apartment ready to take a load off. This time she took the elevator. Avoiding that pseudo-death trap was a top activity, but a second of double vision made the decision for her. At least there had been no reports of a serious breakdown. It creaked all the way to her floor. Crinkling her nose at the bad smells, Patricia focused on staying healthy for the baby. She was already starting to feel the strain from that nice walk. The last thing she needed was to call an ambulance for pickup because she overdid it. Perhaps having a quick snack and a nap might help take the edge off. Finally on her floor, she headed straight for home. The bed was calling her name at this point. Was this side effects of the drugs or her body reacting to the knowledge of being pregnant? There was no way to be sure, but a good rest was in the cards. When George came back tomorrow, she wanted to be ready and refreshed. No girlfriend wanted to look haggard when their boyfriend returned from abroad. Who knew what kind of women were trying to flirt while he was away? He never seemed the cheating kind, but men often noticed beautiful women. Patricia started opening the door when she felt something in her back. Her training kicked in and she reached to flip the person over. In security, you were trained to disarm opponents. Such practice could save lives because there wouldn't always be a weapon available. She had no idea who had come to rob their building, but she was confident that this robber would regret choosing someone they thought was weak and defenseless. Women were always underestimated, and it was both a tragedy and a gift. Plus, she had no intention putting her baby in danger by waiting for this unpredictable attacker to even think of pulling the trigger. "Touch me and I'll fire. Don't fight me, Patricia. Just come quietly." The click of the gun had Patricia freezing, but not so much as the voice of her assailant. This could not be happening. How could life deliver such a terrible curveball? Was a risky pregnancy and George's terrible panic attack not enough bad luck in a few days? She knew there was something suspicious and did her best to follow those instincts, being in public and keeping her phone close. But going home by taxi was not enough to deter the person now holding her at gunpoint. "Mary, what are you doing? Is this about me not accepting Ronald? Is he making you do this?" She hoped a conversation might get her sister out of whatever moment of insanity this was. Then the authorities could be called to help Mary and take in that horrible fiancé of hers. That was who had to be behind all of this. Guess scamming and injuring witnesses was no longer enough. Armed kidnapping was a big step up, and it was cowardly sending her sister to do the deed. If he had shown up, she would have made quick work of that loser. "Of course you think this was all Ronald's idea. I'm just the flighty sister with no sense of self. Thinking you're better than me and stealing that billionaire under my nose. I should be the one pregnant with that moneymaker, not you." Mary spat venom as the gun shook. "You're insane. My sister would never say these things," Patricia said. "You're a good person, and George loves me. He's not the kind of guy you go for. There was no chance. If you weren't in the picture, I would have had a chance. We connected. I know all the top-class things needed to be his woman," Mary snarled. "But no matter. My true love, Ronald, came back. He wanted us to drain you for cash through that sugar daddy, but I knew you would never go for that. So I decided to go with kidnapping. Patricia felt her heart drop. If this was true, then there was no way out. What's going to happen after you hold me for ransom? Are you going to hurt George?
You're a smart cookie. Why would I hurt the golden goose?
Mary asked.
Chapter 10. Patricia struggled against her bindings. Mary had led her to the parking lot where Ronald was waiting in a gray van. The grin on his face was enough to send her into a rage. Inside, she was tied up tight before the vehicle drove away, barely struggling because she didn't want any harm to come to the baby. If she hadn't been pregnant, things would have gone down differently. But she was carrying vulnerable cargo, and just a walk had drained her. Until she was better, any struggle or attack could result in a miscarriage. This was still unbelievable. Her own sister was part of a kidnapping plot just to get money from George. How had their relationship taken such a terrible turn? Not being best friends didn't mean someone was going to rob and hurt you. It was insane that Ronald might have had the less deadly idea. She doubted anyone could get her to take large sums of money from George. But at least that move didn't involve taking her hostage and holding for ransom. Now she was at their mercy, going to some far-off place to wait for the money. She knew Ronald was bad news. He was a criminal looking for the next big score. She never wanted him around, and thought taking precautions and waiting for him to slip was enough. Wrong move, since he was also waiting for an opportunity as well. That snake stayed out of trouble by being 5 steps ahead. Already having a plan in place to trick her out of money was a smart move. Whether or not it worked, that was a decision with hope of yielding profit. That jerk wasn't just a handsome face, but also a hardened and shrewd criminal. Mary, however, was running on anger and adrenaline. Attacking her outside the apartment was risky. There were less people around there, but anyone could have stepped out for all sorts of reasons. If there was any weakness in their plan, it was her sister, who allegedly came up with this crazy kidnapping scheme. For one, that was messy and had many holes. What if George refused to pay the cash or called the cops? What if he couldn't get his hands on money fast enough? There were many variables and ways that things could go south fast. Why did they need the money this bad, though? Why not stick to Ronald's plan? Perhaps it wasn't only about the cash. This gave Mary control and a hand in criminality. Taking a sister hostage, a pregnant one no less, would be looked down upon by any normal person. After this, Mary would always be on the run. People saw them leaving the apartment together. All the pieces linked to Mary. Ronald, however, stayed the shadows, giving orders while Mary was a figurehead using her ideas, but following the ex-con's instructions to the letter. "He's using you, Mary," Patricia spoke up. "Everything connects to you, but not him. If this goes bad, Ronald will run, leaving you holding the bag. Stop this and go to the cops. I will speak on your behalf and try to get a light sentence. This isn't the kind of person you are." She'd been trained to appeal to people's emotions. In security, it was important to know what kind of person you were dealing with. If there was anything left in her sister, then there was a chance. Perhaps Ronald's claws weren't as strong as he assumed. She had to try. "I told you she would underestimate you. Patricia always has to be number one. The prettiest, smartest, have the rich guy who never worked for anything, multiple husbands who could take care of her, play the victim card when things went south, and just the perfect woman. Mary, I have to tell you that she's all that you said and worse." Ronald spoke from up front. His words hit hard. Was that really how Mary saw her? The perfect woman who had everything fall in her lap? Nothing could be further from the truth. It was almost a joke. She had to work hard for everything. Husbands with means was not the same as being a trophy wife. The men she dated weren't not looking for women who weren't going to pull their own weight. Unless, of course, they stayed home having many babies, which was not in the cards for her or something she wanted. No man was pampering her to the point of laziness. Not even George tried to make her quit working and hang out around the house. The idea that she didn't earn everything was nauseating. Mary was the one who wanted others to take care of her, always quitting jobs or getting fired for stupid reasons, including leaving the coffee pot perched on the fax machine. The damage was still being paid off, one of the few times Patricia refused to help. The employer kept the payments small since she was able to help them find a replacement and begged them not to have Mary arrested. It was an embarrassing debacle. To have that same person turn around and claim she was some kind of lazy beauty getting everything handed to her was comical. "You're pathetic, Ronald. My sister is supposed to be your fiancé. What kind of man drags a woman he claims to love into a situation like this?" Patricia tried to damage his ego. He was the mastermind, and if made mad enough, might start making mistakes. She was desperate to find a way out of this before things got worse. This man was a career criminal, and she had seen his face. If that was not bad enough, he had Mary involved. If anything bad happened, her sister would be an accomplice. There had to be a way to stop this before it was too late. You really think I'm dumb enough to listen to that tripe? Oh, the woman you love is in danger. Let me talk to you like a human being. I had military training, sweetheart. That won't work on me. Ronald laughed as he made a sharp turn. I always wanted to knock you off that high horse. Mary knows how life works, but you? Acting as if people all succeed with a little elbow grease, then having the audacity to bag a white billionaire while giving your black brothers the cold shoulder. Oh, and I guess that pregnancy was by immaculate conception too, right? You're a pig, Patricia said. And stop driving like an idiot. I'm pregnant, not a sack of potatoes for you to throw around. If I lose this baby, you're a dead man, no matter where they lock you up. If I were you, I would leave me on the side of the road and take off. She had enough of playing it safe. Ronald was the worst, and she wanted to hurt him. Oink, I'm not the one tied up and rolling about in the back. Always the high and mighty type, we are going to fix that real soon. Ronald said, his voice becoming less smooth. Mary shoved her hard. Don't talk to him like that. He's a great man who has connections you couldn't dream of. Why should he toil for nothing just because the military didn't want him and some woman lied about him trying to touch her? She got hers, and so will you. She laughed and stretched out her legs in the back, a knife in her hand and the gun securely in the waistband, already looking like a criminal ready to do whatever it took to get a score. Mary, you need to listen for once. Ronald is going to get you sent to prison. You're right, George was a great catch. You can still get a man like that if you leave this joker behind and get us out of here. Patricia decided to give it one more try. She had nothing to lose. They weren't going to hurt her before getting to make a ransom demand. After all, despite their thirst for revenge, this pair of criminals were still hoping to make a huge payday. I've had enough of you trying to trick me and treating Ronald like crap, Mary exploded. Grabbing a dirty cloth, she shoved it deep into Patricia's mouth. There. Now we can have some peace. Sorry if I couldn't find a better way to shut you up, Princess. Patricia knew right then the sister she knew was gone. The Mary she grew up with would never act like this. Memories of their childhood flashed through her mind. Nothing could have predicted the woman sitting there today. Instead, she was trapped in this vehicle with two monsters. Her best bet was to wait for a chance to overpower one of them and escape. George walked off the plane happier than ever. He left the country hoping to return as soon as possible to his love. Now there were going to be two important people in his life. First, he had to set his eyes on Patricia to make it all real. The flight back with Cynthia and his employees was a jubilant one. Everyone was happy for him, knowing how much finding love at last meant to their boss. It was great to have such a close relationship with his people. Those who kept a cold distance from their employees were missing out on so much. Patricia was pregnant, and that was such a mind warp. Of course they'd been together, but this was supposed to happen way down the line. After the engagement, marriage, and talks about the future, he'd accepted that they might not have children the natural way, not being willing to lose Patricia over something so trivial. But now she was having his child. Whatever she needed to have this infant safely was at her disposal. He had no intention on losing either of them. Her medical scare was a wake-up call that they needed to have a talk. He'd gotten a call from Mary stating that Patricia was extra tired and resting, that it was better to pop by the apartment as a surprise rather than call, and promising to have someone with her sister at all times. Dropping hints that his girlfriend was excited to find out the gender of the baby. Also to bring takeout so they could chow down together. He took everything in stride. As long as Patricia was safe, he was willing to do whatever she requested. Mary was the perfect person to do this. He knew they had a strained relationship, but she was harmless. Cynthia was more skeptical, still convinced that after the last call, it was unlikely that Patricia would choose her sister to be a house-sitter and roommate. Why trust the person you were planning to kick out? Plus, she was wary of Patricia not making this call herself, but he concluded that his publicist was worrying too much, not taking into account the family dynamics which were unpredictable. One day, siblings were on the best of terms, then at each other's throats the next. Mary was going to be an aunt. What better reason to reform? He also was nervous about another thing. At this point, it seemed a good idea for Patricia to move. As a billionaire, there were multiple places they could move to, but all were far from the community she called home. His girlfriend was possessive of those she cared about. Being an activist wasn't going to make the discussion any easier. After all, her first impression of him was of a rich white man invading her community for his personal gain. Sure, he was doing charity, but there was still the incentive of good press and being in the spotlight. Perhaps he needed to show Patricia that life with him would be just as carefree as her own. Sure, there were bodyguards, but they could go incognito, giving them a better sense of privacy while out. Maybe even find an outing where they could actually be alone. Like a tour of landmarks where the security was unrivaled. It would be a much better outing than just hanging out at the movies. At least, he hoped Patricia would see things that way. The life of a billionaire was filled with both ups and downs. Once Patricia understood that a balance could be found with both his and her world, he had no doubt she would embrace the idea of moving in with him. The apartment was likely a quaint spot with lots of nostalgia, but that didn't equal safety or make it easy to seek top-notch medical treatment if anything went wrong. She needed to be in an environment where help was just a button, phone call, or helicopter ride away. Outsiders who married into wealthy families usually got used to things after a while. He saw no reason why Patricia wouldn't be able to do the same. The limo went straight to a popular fast food joint, where Cynthia insisted on making the orders. He didn't plan on bringing her along, but she insisted, still determined to prove that something was wrong. It was as if she was craving some kind of drama. Was she preparing for when the relationship went public? Was there a leak and she was distracting him until the time was right? There was no way of knowing, but part of him wanted to hurry to see his girlfriend just to prove his publicist incorrect. After all, who would want to harm Patricia? Arriving at the apartment complex was quite an experience. He was somewhat unimpressed with where his girlfriend resided. It was more quaint than expected, and there were beggars sneaking onto the property without being stopped. A big security risk since he'd heard stories of thieves pretending to be poor people in order to sneak into buildings and rob innocent bystanders. The grounds were poorly maintained, and Cynthia screamed seeing a raccoon scurry by as if it was an everyday thing. The vermin weren't even being terminated. He was already regretting allowing 2 bodyguards to mix into the crowd unseen. The pictures online didn't do this dumpster dive justice. You better drag her out of this place screaming if you have to. I swear that raccoon was big enough to steal my tablet. Cynthia shuddered as George checked with the front desk. People were already beginning to stare at them. They'd decided to dress in no-name brand clothing, but they still looked more immaculately dressed than most of the people present. There was even a man wearing tiny shorts and a cowboy hat chatting with someone wearing a sheet with 2 eye holes. He could see immediately that the building had no self-respecting dress code whatsoever. George tried to take the elevator but got off only 2 floors up. It smelled absolutely ghastly, and Cynthia came out with a coughing fit. This place was an absolute nightmare. How could Patricia live here for years, when he couldn't wait to get out in just minutes? He'd been to homeless shelters with better hygiene maintenance than this building. A place where people were supposed to live and procreate? No child deserved to be in this house of horrors. No way was his going to even know this awful complex ever existed on the face of the earth. I should have stayed in the limo. Patricia must be a secret warrior in order to survive these horrors. Cynthia covered her nose with a handkerchief as they took the stairs, but froze upon seeing a pair of rats run down the railing. Walking slowly without touching anything, the pair made their way to Patricia's floor, jumping at every shadow and random squeak heard along the way. If this was what it meant to not be in the top percentile, neither wanted this kind of life for themselves. This might as well be a prison with a free pass to go outside. George was determined to get his girlfriend out of this hellhole right away. Rats carried all kinds of horrible diseases. Seeing them run around as if this building was their playground injected a level of fear he didn't know was possible. Perhaps Patricia was hospitalized for other reasons, like her body reacting to all the contaminants she inhaled while living in this modern-day hostel from the Twilight Zone. There had to be a way to convince her this was not a normal way to live, or if it was that she should run and never look back. Standing by Patricia's door was a brown-skinned man he didn't recognize. The guy looked at ease, hanging out in the hallway. Though by the threads he was wearing, it didn't look like someone who actually lived there. Could this be one of Mary's friends coming to visit? Hopefully it wasn't the terrible man that Mary was dating, but he doubted Patricia would have him hanging out by her apartment. Not with a criminal record, and certainly not while she was pregnant and vulnerable. Living in this rat nest of a building was enough of a risk. Hello, I'm here to see Patricia Williams. George Kent is my name, and this is Cynthia. We are expected, so don't worry. If you could call her or Mary to the door, it would be much appreciated. George greeted the man, shaking his hand with a smile. Cynthia, meanwhile, looked red-faced. She pushed him aside and pulled out her pepper spray. I did my research and know who you are. Patricia wouldn't have your con artist butt near her apartment. Where is she, and if you make any sudden moves, I'll spray this until the bottle's empty. The man, smoking a cigarette, grinned and held his hands up. I'm not here to do no harm. In fact, I'm delivering good news. Ronald's my name, and Patricia is in great hands if we can come to an agreement about a few things. First, White Mama, please take that mace away from my face. My girl's with Patricia, and she's not as sweet as I am. If my face gets all messed up, who knows what might happen to the pregnant Missy you two like so much. His grin widened as George pulled Cynthia away from him. You're the one Patricia warned me about. Where are Mary and my girlfriend? I swear if any harm comes to them, you'll never see the outside of a prison cell. George stepped forward. I might not be a thug, but believe me that money talks well with the justice system. Hurt the ones I love, and you will pay dearly. I promise that. He wasn't in the mood for games. There was no question the females weren't here. This man was too suave and carefree to have hostages nearby. The question was, did either female meet some kind of deadly fate? I'm glad she told you about me, Mr. Kent. Because I know quite a bit about you, including the fact that you have more than enough money to pay a ransom. Your wife and unborn child must be priceless. Ronald blew smoke in his face. And don't worry about my fiancée. She's keeping your chocolate lover company. In fact, this kidnapping plot was her idea. I was just going to find a way to get Patricia to part with your money, but this is a lot more satisfying. A mall cop shouldn't get to fall into money like yours without earning it. Well, a criminal like you shouldn't talk about earning anything. I need proof of life, and I don't believe that Mary did this. George slammed his hand against the wall. Ronald pulled out a burner phone and showed George a video. One with a smirking Mary waving around a gun with Patricia tied up in a chair nearby. Mary was boasting that she was going to be rich soon, and that if George didn't get them $10 million in 24 hours, or if he called the cops that her sister and unborn child would die. "Tick-tock, white man," Ronald smirked. He gave strict instructions on where to drop off the money, warning that Mary was serious about offing Patricia if cops came. Then he walked away whistling and went down in the elevator. What are we going to do? Cynthia looked at George in a panic. A bodyguard who was standing down the hall walked up to them. Patricia has been taken. There's only one thing to do. I'm not trusting these monsters to hand her over since she knows who they are. George used his cell to call the FBI.
Chapter 11. Patricia kept working at the cords, tying her to a metal chair. They'd taken her to an abandoned meatpacking plant. The place smelled old and disgusting, with rats the size of small cars scurrying about in the open. Mary paced a lot, since she feared vermin with a passion. Ronald insisted that no one would look for them here, and it was a great hideout. Ronald was the only one willing to feed her, confessing he had to go back up to her floor to get George to give up the food. Awkward after telling the man he was a kidnapper. A woman had walked up and brought the meals forward. He assumed she was some kind of highbrow assistant. Didn't like her since she'd looked him up and had the nerve to threaten him. Patricia laughed hard at that part and almost got her meal taken away. Good thing she ate because any food left for other meals were eaten by Mary, mocking her and only offering water, pretending she was lying about being hungry whenever Ronald checked in. I can't believe you're being so petty. What are you hoping to do once this is over? Run off into the sunset? It was ludicrous that they truly thought this was a crime that would end well. Kidnappings were hard to carry out, and even more so to get away with. She had no doubt that George called the authorities. He was the type of person who still trusted the police. With his clout, they would turn heaven and earth to find her. Catching those responsible would be icing on the cake. A win for the law in fighting against the criminal elements. I told you to be quiet. I'm in charge, and you get to shut up and be the weaker sister for once. Always walking around with your nose in the air, acting as if no man was good enough but jumping for a white billionaire first chance. You are just a gold digger, Mary threw at her. At least I'm willing to admit I'm not perfect. The sight of you makes me want to vomit. No wonder no black man wanted your self-absorbed butt. The adoption agencies saw through your crap, though, refusing to give a reject like you a baby to raise and turn into an idiot. Patricia blinked back tears listening to that horrible rant. Those words were hurtful. Her own sister was pretending she only dated George for his money and throwing the adoption failures in her face.
Ronald could never force anyone to act like that.
Mary had made the choice to go over the dark side out of jealousy and greed.
There was no saving this one.
She had to focus on getting out of there before the money came. Mary was too erratic to be trusted after the ransom was paid. Patricia wanted to leave here alive with her baby.
What could I have done to make you so filled with hate? I was there for you many times. I'm your sister, for heaven's sake. Ronald is using you to get a big payday. He'll take you out the second the opportunity presents itself.
Patricia tried to get through to Mary one final time. Even when it was hopeless, she needed to let Mary know there was still a chance at redemption. They grew up together as a family. If any of that bond was genuine, there was a chance that maybe her sister would face reality and end this farce before it all went downhill. Instead, Mary started laughing her head off, pulling out the gun and holding it near Patricia's chest.
Do I look like I care about your lies? We were never really sisters. You were the one who was better than everyone else, and I existed in your shadow. Mom and Dad gave me pity, but they loved you, always making you work harder because they believed in you. Not me. I had to get special treatment as the little one. Punished less because I was somehow dumber than you.
The worst part was you never understood that and resented them for it. Mary went on to talk about different times she felt slighted by Patricia, whether directly or inadvertently. She blamed the bound woman for everything that went wrong with her life, even losing Ronald because back then she had doubts thanks to Patricia's concerns, that she thought moving in with her sister should have been an adventure, and instead, it was like living with a nasty drill sergeant, always ordered to do things she was getting to eventually, treated as if she was too dumb to follow basic instructions. It was hell and she hated every second. Then the same gun-toting sister ranted about having to work stupid jobs, that Patricia just had to hold down the fort until Mary was back on her feet. Stiffing the landlord would have worked if she'd been allowed to seduce him. But Mall Cop Girl had to be noble and stick to paying all the bills, dragging her into that mess and criticizing her for it. She was better than anyone at those stupid workplaces. Doing that kept her from finding a man willing to take care of everything. In her mind, Ronald returning with cash was proof she was right. Patricia was certain that Mary had gone over the deep end. This woman wanted to blame her for everything under the sun, even when she was nowhere in sight. She didn't make Ronald a con man and a liar. He was a career criminal and monster. Their parents were abusive and wanted to take advantage of them. She cut ties to preserve her sanity. They never acted out of love, and the fact that Mary thought that happened was frightening. As usual, her little sister had opted to blame everyone else for mistakes she made. Her mind drifted to George. He had to be beside himself with worry. To find out that she was pregnant and now kidnapped. She knew he would blame himself for being wealthy, that a pair of vagabonds made off with the love of his life for a ransom. Every part of her wanted to scream it wasn't his fault. But when Ronald made the video, Mary had threatened to punch her in the stomach if she said a word. They'd made the recording from inside the plant. A move she didn't understand. Why not in the van to keep the location secret? They dropped the ball. She was determined to get back to the love of her life and not lose this pregnancy. After all that had transpired, George wasn't going to lose her. She refused to let everything end in this dank factory with a pair of psychos. Mary made her choice, and she was not going to put any more effort into negotiating with someone willing to do such terrible things. It was beyond time to find a way out and get help. As long as it was only one of them to fight, she had a shot. Ronald had a military background, so her sister was the best opponent to fight. And since you're so curious, know this. After we get the money, I'm personally killing you and that freaky spawn in your belly. Neither of you are leaving here alive. Mary confirmed her worst fears. The sister she no longer knew laughed and hit her in the side of the head. How are my lovely ladies? Ronald walked in with more food. He looked more jovial than usual. No, I'm feeding her this time. She looks pale. I don't want her fainting before we're ready to get out of here. Baby killers get the death penalty. We're getting away clean. Whatever you say, baby. Mary kissed his cheek but gave Patricia a nasty side glare. There was no questioning the truth. Her own sister was planning to commit murder against Ronald's wishes. To see this con man as the lesser monster was quite a shock. If things got any more out of whack, she might end up needing to be put in a mental institution. Patricia could feel the cords were loosening, a good sign. All she needed was an opportunity alone with Mary to make her escape. While both were present, she had to play the part of unwilling prisoner. Pretending to be nice would only raise suspicion. "So, you enjoy feeding women tied up? Anything I need to know?" she mocked Ronald.
"Do a perimeter check, Mary," Ronald ordered, and her sister skipped off obediently. "Listen, we both know that George is going to pay the ransom. Don't do anything stupid. My sister wants to kill me," Patricia said as he fed her.
"That girl can't shoot anything an inch from her face. Don't let her use a knife," Ronald said nonchalant. "I'm not going down as a baby killer." George stood at an old lumber mill. It was set for demolition in a few days. The entire area was abandoned and stood outside the city limits. He shuddered at the thought that Patricia was held hostage in an area like this. What could possess her own sister to take part in a crime like this? Mary seemed so cultured and fun-loving when they last hung out. Goes to show that you didn't know what was truly going on in the hearts of others. Cynthia had been right all along, and he wasn't sure about trusting his instincts outside of business matters. The FBI were out in full force. Ronald Drake was already on their radar. Suspected of being a rising crime lord posing as a lowly con man, they'd wanted to lock him up long-term, but the weasel kept slipping away with limited jail time. Multiple witnesses had recanted after being threatened or injured. A few even disappeared. A chance to catch this man and also save the girlfriend of a billionaire was too big to pass up. George had decided to tell the authorities everything he knew to raise the chances of Patricia being found alive. "So I just follow the instructions and leave the money by that empty dumpster?" George went over with an agent hidden from sight. He wanted to do more. Have Ronald taken down the second that hoodlum walked out. But the problem was this area had a lot of places to hide, especially a hostage and 2 kidnappers. Also, since Ronald was picking up the cash, that meant most likely Mary was staying with Patricia based off the description of the video. None of the agents wanted to take the chance that Mary wouldn't shoot the hostage if Ronald didn't return with the money. "Yes, do exactly as he demanded, then drive away. We have it all under control, sir," the agent responded. The man looked barely 30, but he had no doubt this person could take him down in seconds. They were trained for moments like this, to save hostages. George nodded and went to take the suitcases out of the car. They were black with wheels at the bottom as instructed. Not very convenient to take along on this terrain. Better to carry than drag. Ronald even demanded a particular brand with convertible options. There was actually only 2 million. Real bills on the top and fakes under that. They were top-notch, taken from a vault where the best fakes had been found and stored for sting operations. Leaving those suitcases behind was hard. Everything in him wanted to stay. But that would put Patricia at risk, and if she died, he couldn't bear the pain of such a loss. Neither his bodyguards or Cynthia were allowed to come along. He felt naked without them. George pulled away in the rented Lexus. "Please God, let my love return safely to my arms." Patricia could feel the bonds almost ready to fall away. Ronald's words kept playing back in her head, warning that Mary was good with a knife but bad at shooting a gun. Why would he reveal such a thing to a hostage? It was such a strange thing to do. Giving her insight into his accomplice's weaknesses was a stupid move. But she knew he wasn't an idiot and did everything for a reason. So there was a reason for him saying that to her. She just had no idea why, unless he wanted to give the woman he hated a chance to escape. "The money's arrived," Ronald announced, and she noticed a walkie-talkie that wasn't on his hip before. "It's 6, and I told that Kent guy I wanted it delivered promptly in the evening. No doubt his scared pale body is shaking in his boots as he drops off all that loot." He looked confident and at ease. Nothing like someone walking out to a drop alone, which was risky. There was no way a career criminal like him didn't know that. But why the walkie-talkie all of a sudden? She never saw Mary with one, and he'd been wandering off a lot over the last few hours. "I knew you could do it, honey. Now go get that cash for the both of us." Mary kissed him passionately, the pair not parting for several minutes. Patricia was surprised she was still the only one pregnant after that display. Her sister was getting more antsy as the drop time approached, probably wondering how to explain why killing Patricia was the best idea. After all, Ronald didn't want to kill a pregnant woman. She was certain that this baby saved her life. At no point did he state anything about not wanting to take out a woman.
"Fine, but I'm going to need a favor. It might sound weird, but it's for the right reason," Ronald said, stroking Mary's hair. "Can I borrow your knife? I saw a homeless man wandering about earlier in the day, and in case we buck into each other, I don't want to make a lot of noise."
Mary stepped back. "You never mentioned anything about people being around."
Just a homeless man I don't want seeing my face and remembering me. Ronald held her hand. You do trust me, right? Besides, you have the gun. If Patricia acts up, just point it at her and she'll behave for the baby's sake.
Patricia was taking in what was happening. Ronald was giving her a fighting chance. There was no doubt that he knew about Mary's plan. With her training, taking down a knife-wielding attacker was possible but tricky. If Mary really was that terrible a shot, though, getting a chance to take that gun away was even better. Either way, she just had to wait a few minutes to ensure Ronald was outside the factory before making her move and getting away.
Okay, I trust you. Mary handed over the large hunting knife off her belt. I trained real good with that thing. No one knows how good I am except you. That ex of yours never saw it coming.
That's because people underestimate you, and I don't. You proved your loyalty to me, and that girl will never talk to the cops again. Heard she left the state with one eye. Ronald chuckled, then jogged away with a wave. Patricia was blindsided to hear that Mary had attacked an innocent woman. Perhaps Ronald was right about her sister being underestimated. Mary was smart enough to do anything she put her mind to, which apparently now included using knives on people. Whatever plan she had was coming out swinging. If Mary was that good, there was a chance she might be able to carry out decent physical defense. She had to be ready for anything to get out alive. Mary walked over to a broken window, probably to get a glimpse of Ronald passing by as he headed for the drop site. When that maniac started waving, it would be a signal to tear off these cords and attack from behind. As long as she didn't get the gun in time and wasn't a kung fu master in secret. Patricia was confident about taking her sister down. She hoped that George didn't stick around. He was not a fighter, and certainly not good enough to beat a bona fide criminal like Ronald. The last thing she wanted when this ended was to end up being a single mother. With Mary gone dark, he was the closest thing she had left as family. It was hard enough losing blood, but George was the kind of loss she wasn't sure she could survive. She felt for him in months that others couldn't achieve in years. Mary started waving and blowing kisses, the perfect sign that Ronald was too far to intervene. Not that he wanted to, based off his recent actions. Patricia tore off her bonds quietly and worked on the ones tying her feet. Just as Mary started to turn around, she was free. Running at her sister full speed, she hit her hard from the side, sending them both tumbling to the ground. "You stupid bitch, I'm going to make you pay for that!" Mary raged, headbutting her. Patricia was undeterred, grabbing Mary by the hair with the left hand and straddling her, then proceeding to punch her opponent in the face repeatedly. "This is for betraying me, you crazy idiot!" At some point, Mary got the gun out, but like Ronald said, she was a horrible shot, missing 3 close-range shots, including one that whizzed by her ear, making it hard to hear. With a few last punches, Mary was finally knocked out. Patricia emptied the clip from the gun and popped out the one bullet in the chamber, throwing it all in opposite directions. It was finally over and she was free. Getting up to walk out, she felt a sudden pain. It went away, but she knew that meant the baby might be in danger. Instead of running like she wanted, Patricia walked downstairs slowly and made her way outside at a snail's pace. Just then, she saw the taillights of a car disappearing in the distance. Another wave of pain hit her, causing her to fall on her butt. Unable to go any further, she leaned against a crate and waited for help. "Patricia!" a familiar voice cried as she opened her eyes. The room looked lavish and unfamiliar. She jumped, seeing Cynthia by the door. "What's happening? Where am I?" "At one of George's decked-out safe houses," Cynthia revealed. "You were rather weak when the FBI found you. Hiding by a crate, you poor dear. Those monsters did a number on you." "Well, not compared to how you beat up that evil sister. The stories always say stepsisters are bad, but I guess Mary's the exception to the rule. I can't imagine such a betrayal." "I no longer have a sister," Patricia sighed. "She was willing to kill me when Ronald wasn't. Let me guess, he took off with the money and left my sister alone to face the music."
Absolutely right. That monster's fled the country, I'm afraid. He's someone else's problem now. Your sister swears he forced her into kidnapping you, and swears her big sister will back up that story," Cynthia continued.
"Fat chance they can throw away the key. As soon as I'm able, I'll tell law enforcement what really happened." Patricia scoffed. Even arrested, her sister expected someone to bail her out. Not this time. "Hello, sleepyhead." George walked in with a tray holding tea and biscuits. "I'm not sure if this is the best thing to serve, but I didn't want you lying around with an empty stomach." Patricia leaned forward and hugged him. She was so glad to see that her boyfriend was okay.
I was worried they might hurt you. Thanks for taking care of me.
You give me too much credit. George hugged her back. It has been nearly a week since that awful attack. The baby's fine, but you need to be on bed rest starting now. The stress on your body has made you extra vulnerable. Recovery will take time.
Patricia groaned, but then she smiled and kissed George on the cheek. I'm so grateful to have you in my life. We're having a baby together, and I want to be with you forever.
Well, if that's true, why wait? George went on one knee, and Patricia gasped. Patricia Williams, will you make me the happiest man on earth and be my wife? Yes! Patricia squealed, almost knocking over the tray. I want to be with you for the rest of our lives, raise children, and grow old together.
At the mansion, not that creepy apartment, Cynthia added.
Chapter 12. A year later, Patricia stood in the nursery tickling her twin daughters. A pair of bubbly brown angels stared back. These were her babies, and after a lifetime of hoping, they were finally here. No longer wishes, hopes, or rejected adoption letters. She still woke up sometimes, not believing where life had taken her. This was a miracle, and she was beyond grateful. From a modest life without romance, but rich in friendship and community, to a lavish one filled with romance, new friendships, love, a child, and a grand rise in material possessions. The last one she cared about least. Materialistic possessions could never take the place of personal connections and good deeds. Her life was good, and, while more would have helped, she never ached for the status of the uber-wealthy. Ironic with where she was now. George was a billionaire. That reality was always clear. But she fell for the man, not his money. Both were a part of him, from the way he grew up to lifestyle. A wealthy man and one without can never be the same person. Their lives would always be different in too many ways. Marrying George was one of the highlights of her life. By then, she was nearly 6 months and visibly pregnant. The wedding was lavish and everything expected of a billionaire couple. But before that, there was a small reception for close family and friends, where they said their vows and kissed cheeks instead of lips. Everyone cheered, and she was happy he was willing to let her have this small thing before the grand spectacle. At the official wedding, she wore the best gown and George in an expensive tux. Cynthia kept things running smoothly. In front of both their friends and family, the happy couple kissed, becoming man and wife. The media called their union a dream come true. Hope for men and women everywhere still looking for love against huge odds. Part of her liked that, the offer of it never being too late. Romance was for everyone, and those who wanted to pursue it shouldn't be discouraged. Age, lifestyle, gender, location, nothing made someone exempt from finding love and being loved. That went for those who chose the single life too, like she did for a time. Everyone's status should be respected so they could live their best life, whether as a couple or solo. Their relationship went public weeks after the kidnapping. Cynthia wanted them to speak out first, get ahead of the media, and form positive public opinion. Patricia had been hesitant and nearly didn't do a primetime interview with George, but he declared it wouldn't be done without her, and he accepted what she wanted. In the end, they went on television discussing how they met and some of the events right up to the kidnapping. It was actually cathartic putting things in the open. Terrifying, too, with cameras and bright lights in your face. Public response was mixed. Most were happy for them. Seeing an older couple in love from different side of the tracks made for great television. Well wishes came from all over the world, but a small contingent were angry. Reasons ranged from thinking Patricia was a gold digger, George was marrying below him, and that in one way or another, each was betraying their race. George because he picked an eligible black woman instead of a white female. Patricia because she was a hypocrite for giving up on love but falling for a rich white man. Patricia tried to focus on life outside the spotlight, which included testifying at her sister's sentencing. Mary had decided to take a deal for 40 years without parole. The prosecutor wanted life, but that meant a lengthy trial. To her surprise, Mary had gained a lot of sympathy playing the victim card, claiming in interviews and through a pro bono lawyer that Ronald had been the real mastermind, that Patricia had tried to stop it but was unsuccessful. According to Mary, it was Ronald who wanted to do the murder and force the whole pretense that someone else was the mastermind. Public opinion leaned in Mary's favor. George wanted to go to trial, and so did Patricia at first. But as public opinion started to shift, even Cynthia admitted there was a chance of a mistrial. She decided it was better to have a deal. Using the threat of Patricia testifying while still pregnant, they were able to get Mary to accept a lengthy sentence in a minimum security prison, vetoing any pardons for the first 20 years. Mary was angry, but her lawyer advised that with the Kent influence, things could get worse. So Patricia repeated the story of her ordeal while being held hostage. Mary then read a public apology, and the judge upheld the deal, and Mary went to prison. There was no question that both had gone through a lot to get where they were today. Fate wanted them to be together. She never doubted that now. People broke up for less than what they persevered through. From awkward beginnings to surprise kidnappings, they endured. Giving birth was done via C-section. It was decided early on that a natural birth was too risky. After the kidnapping, Patricia was even more vulnerable. A year after the birth, and she still had fainting spells, and had to be careful with heavy physical activity. When they found out it was twins and girls, both were excited and nervous. For the idea of 2 babies at once, and also the medical implications that could take place. In the end, the babies were healthy. The babies were just a few months now. Little treasures that giggled and tried to explore the world around them. For now, the mansion would be their home. But Patricia wanted them to see more of the world as they grew older, including where she used to live. George was fine with that, but self-appointed Aunt Cynthia didn't want them touching that apartment complex until they were old enough to drink, mumbling that was the only way to forget that place. "I see that you're just as transfixed with these babies as I am." George came up from behind, wrapping arms around her waist, adding a kiss in the neck. Married life was good for both of them. It was a new beginning for both of them. Their lives forever changed, and for the better. Many things had to come together just for them to meet. Now married, neither let a day go by without being grateful for how things worked out. It could have easily not have done so. Maria and Greta are going to be wonderful women one day. I'm never going to forgive you for making me name one of our babies after your grandmother. Greta is truly an old lady name, Patricia mumbled, playing with the infant in the yellow onesie. But my auntie's name is perfect. Sure, it's similar to Mary's, but that's in the past. I want our little ones to have the best the future has to offer, not just in the materialistic, but in every way possible. The babies giggled in their crib, reaching out to the parents standing over them. Both were loved beyond measure as the bundles of joy they were. Maria in her pink onesie was the most vocal of the pair, making her demands known through happy sounds or loud crying. Greta was quieter, but much more active, always gesticulating or reaching for something. If you held anything near her, it was best to keep both eyes on that item. The nannies enjoyed playing with the little ones when the parents were busy with other affairs. "Thank you," George said suddenly. Their marriage was going well, but there were rocky points. Patricia refused to move to England where his parents lived. That was a contention for weeks. Holiday visits were fine, but uprooting away from America was out of the question. He'd been foolish to not change his promise of raising the Kent children in another country. Patricia wasn't the first love that he lost. She had deep roots back in the States and no interest in permanently living in another country. Perhaps one day in the future, but not now. For what? Marrying a dashing man with awkward charm? Patricia teased him with a smile. George was seen as a handsome, formal man with impeccable taste in the public eye. Perfect in every way with a shrewd business sense. She saw what was behind that. A man wanting to please and take care of those around him. From his loved ones to staff, he never wanted anyone to feel left out or unwanted. It was a quality often underappreciated today, but she was glad that was part of who he was. A gentle man who loved fiercely. George laughed, planting another kiss on her cheek. "I am the luckiest man in the world to have you by my side. A woman who understands and cares for me in all the ways a wife and best friend can. Almost losing you was the worst day of my life. But I know now we're strong enough to face down anything that gets in our way. We're more than a couple. We are a team, and nothing can separate us." He pulled her into a tight hug, which she slowly returned, her heart beating 1,000,000 miles a second. Patricia blinked back tears. This was what she got for picking a sappy guy as her husband. Not that she would undo that choice for a second, but he was a great foil for her. The hard life she lived sometimes had her miss the simple joys in life. Ironic that a wealthy man with everything noticed them more. They fit together like a glove, and she loved every moment of this wonderful life. "If you make me break down in front of our babies, I'm putting you in the doghouse. Cynthia can help you organize your schedule from there." George chuckled, stroking her hair. Their different personalities melded or clashed with regularity. No matter what, they were still deeply in love. Marriage wasn't about being perfect. The union of two souls was about what they could do together that was impossible apart. The past wouldn't be forgotten, but they were focused on a happy future together. George, there you are. I have the ambassador you canceled on yesterday online too. If you send me with another delay, I'll go work for him. Cynthia peeked in. Hi, Patricia. Hi, angels. Boss, you need to hurry up. Patricia sighed and stepped away from George. For the time being, she'd chosen to be a stay-at-home mom, enjoying time with her young babies. George had taken 3 months off to be with them, but that was past now, and he had to get back to business. It wasn't easy having a husband who was also married to his work. That was a choice both knew going in. He was never going to retire anytime soon. The call of the job was in his blood. She'd decided to accept that and was certain that they would find a way to make things work. The day she decided to start working again would be another discussion as well. Go get them, Tiger. We can talk more at dinner, Patricia said. Hi, Cynthia. Is the baby shower for the mayor's daughter this weekend? I want to ensure my dress is ready in time. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The shower is canceled. A family tragedy, I'm afraid. Cynthia sighed. Sad to hear. A reminder that we should treasure every second, Patricia said. I love you forever, George said, and Patricia nodded. Cheer up, you're visiting for that charity auction event tomorrow. Patricia nodded and turned back to the babies. Patricia stood on the podium, naming the next item being auctioned, determined to still be there for the community and city where she once lived. 7 months after the birth of the babies, she started discussing restarting her activism, but on a larger scale, with all the new resources at her disposal. There was so much good that could be done. George was supportive as long as she took things slow and steady. She wasn't completely obedient to that, but knew when to sit back before taking too much of a physical toll on herself. Most residents had been so happy for her good fortune. If there was anyone deserving of meeting a loving billionaire, it was mall security guard Patricia Williams. It was touching with the many letters, emails, calls, and more sending congratulations. Cynthia jokingly asked if she was secretly a celebrity in disguise. People where she lived were often there for each other, happy in their good fortune instead of getting jealous. A quality that made the place wonderful to love and cherish. Even if there were high rollers pushing out some of the working and lower middle-class residents, which was a direction she was trying to undo. Those who resided in this community for decades should not be driven out by overzealous outsiders and greedy landowners. There was so much history and community being lost because of this. It started with emailing politicians and those of influence about the problem, doing a few television spots to put a face on this issue by having residents speak out as well. Word got out, and more were willing to look at what was happening, which meant there was more offers to assist them. There was some pushback by those who felt she was no longer part of the community. A woman who ran off with a billionaire now wanting to show off, not truly out to help, but only hogging the spotlight. New residents of means took offense to being seen as problematic, stating they wanted a nice community to live in, and the rise in price wasn't their fault. Patricia did her best to explain that the problem was systemic and had multiple factors. Change had to be made from the ground up. The current system wasn't helping people. Proceeds went towards helping families keep their homes. Also towards research into legal representation to help set better real estate and rental rates. This was just a drop in the bucket towards solving this long-standing problem. But a journey started with a single step. She was determined in her lifetime to turn things around for her community. Moving away didn't lessen her dedication. She might not have been born there, but moving to this place after all the divorces saved her life. This place knew how to fix the broken. She also tried to help shelters that housed the homeless, whether because of finances, social issues, or abuse. Sending supplies and cash to help keep the places running. Remembering the days of visiting for food drives and other helpful activities. People would walk up to thank her, sometimes stopped by bodyguards who now dogged her footsteps. They backed off when ordered, but it wasn't easy keeping them away after she was kidnapped and almost killed by her own sister. It wasn't easy to turn people away. Whenever she could allow them to come close, she did so with a smile and a hug. Cynthia lived for these events. At first wary of how it might look, she now helped whenever available. Both butting heads sometimes when the other felt they were being overbearing. But they made a dynamo team. Cynthia always wanted to get things running smoothly, loving the challenge of new things and innovation. Charity was considered an important part of business. Patricia got a lesson in how valuable it was to businesses to give back. Also to have those who were able to keep schedules and other things running on time. Thank you for all the donations. Sales will be going to help keep this community from being gentrified. "I thank you for coming today," Patricia said, and went to sit down. It felt great doing good and seeing all the wealthy people who came in solidarity of doing the right thing. "Are there any questions from the media?" Cynthia walked up to the podium. At first, Patricia took the forefront, but that led to some undesirables coming just to heckle her. Now Cynthia or a representative stood up front at open public events like these. When it was just close friends or a more selective guest list, Patricia was allowed to be front and center. A screen was on stage to help anyone further back see the questions being answered. "Thank you." A reporter stood up with a bright smile. "Mrs. Kent, first off, thank you for organizing this amazing auction. My question is, how do you balance being a stay-at-home mother with being a social activist?" There had been a warning not to bring up the children, but the media always tried to find a loophole. This was a litmus test to see how far they could take things. If shut down now, they might decide not to ask any more questions, putting a stink on the ending of a fine event. Clips would pop up everywhere with negativity. "I can answer that one. Thank you to all media houses appearing today. Word needs to get out about those in need." Patricia responded graciously. "Motherhood has been a blessing. I'm among the women who thought they would never have a child. My twins are wonderful and healthy. When it comes to balance, I have advantages other mothers don't. Wealth, a happy marriage, servants, and nannies. So when it comes to balancing being a mom and activism, I just trust my judgment and the help from those around me. Thank you." There was a round of applause, signaling that answering was the right choice. She didn't go into too much details about the twins, but dropped a hint that let the media have a nugget to discuss. Healthy babies and mothers with difficult pregnancies would be enough to keep those wanting personal stories busy for a while. "Hi, Cynthia and Patricia. I'm honored for a chance to speak." The next reporter rose. "What do you have to say to those who feel that your charity choices are biased, that your focus is on families and Black people, not those from the LGBT and other races?" There was silence. This wasn't a question they'd prepared for. "Let me make something clear. I'm not here to placate anyone. Being Black has a huge impact on my life, and I will not apologize for that," Patricia said firmly. "Racism is a serious issue in America. There's a clear majority white gentrification happening in our community. That affects everyone, whether they are Black or members of other diverse parts. Gay people are only a tiny portion of those moving here, which means most either can't afford or are being edged out of coming. Why that is goes above my pay grade. My charity endeavors are for everyone. If what's being showcased looks too heterosexual, then that's a question for the media to answer. We have a small, outspoken gay presence, and they are happy with what has been happening, so take care." A cheer came from the back, and several gay pride flags waved in the air. Patricia had always supported the gay community. If anyone felt different, they were free to prove it. The rest of the event went smoothly. No one else tried to be that outspoken at the auction. Media was a two-edged sword. It was important to learn how to control those dynamics. The money raised was triple the highest estimates, and everyone felt proud of themselves. "Look at my lovely wife, the queen of philanthropy," George declared from the parking lot as she headed for the limo. "Surprise. I got out of my meeting early enough to watch from the sidelines. Didn't want to take away from the juicy charity headlines." Patricia squealed and ran over to hug her husband. He often stayed away from these charities because the news focused on him, not the event. It was great seeing him there to cheer her on. They always supported each other in their endeavors. "I can't believe you're here. We were just about to head home." "Actually, I have a better idea," George said, holding up a flyer. "There's a drag queen contest happening at the stadium, and maybe we can crash it. Show those trying to besmirch our good name that we support everybody. I'm sure they won't mind the extra press we'll bring by peeping in." Patricia kissed him. She was always going to thank heaven for getting the perfect husband. "Thank you. Let's go." The end.